The rejection letter arrived on a Tuesday. Elena Mercer held it between fingers that had stopped shaking after the third refusal, then the fourth, then the fifth. By now her hands were shaking so much that she could barely hold the letter fourth, then the fifth. By now her hands stayed steady because disappointment had become routine. She stood in the cramped teachers' quarters behind Red Hollow's one-room schoolhouse, reading words that different men had written in different ways, but always meant the same thing. We regret to inform you that after careful consideration, we have chosen to pursue a match with another candidate. We wish you well in your search. Another candidate. Always another candidate. Elena set the letter on the pile with the others and walked to the cracked mirror above her wash basin. 29 years old, hair too dark, pulled back too severe, eyes that looked at men directly instead of down at the floor like a proper woman should, lips that asked questions when they should have stayed shut. Too much, she whispered to her reflection. That's what you are. Too educated, too opinionated, too goddamn much for any man who wants a wife instead of a problem. Outside, Red Hollow prepared for another brutal winter. The frontier town clung to existence at the edge of civilization, where men came to disappear and women came because they had nowhere else to go. Elena had arrived 5 years ago with a teaching certificate and romantic notions about bringing education to the wilderness. The romance had frozen to death her first winter. The teaching job remained because nobody else wanted it. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Mercer?" Sarah Chen's voice carried through the thin door. "You have a visitor." Elena straightened her dress and opened the door. Sarah ran the boarding house and served as Red Hollow's unofficial postmaster, gossip distributor, and marriage broker. The Chinese woman's face wore an expression Elena couldn't read. "Another letter?" Elena asked. "Not exactly." Sarah held out a newspaper. The Territorial Advertiser, weeks old and worn from travel. "Came with the supply wagon. Thought you should see page 7 before anyone else does." Elena took the paper. Page 7 held the usual assortment of advertisements, land sales, mining equipment, patent medicines promising miracles. But one notice occupied a full quarter page, printed in bold type that demanded attention. Wanted. Practical woman for marriage contract. Successful rancher, age 34, seeks educated woman for immediate marriage arrangement. No courtship period required. Successful candidate will manage household, provide heir, and maintain discretion regarding business affairs. Comfortable accommodations provided. Romantic sentiment discouraged. Financial security guaranteed. Woman must possess reasonable health, education, ability to withstand frontier conditions, and realistic expectations regarding the nature of this arrangement. This is a business proposition, not a love match. Respond only if you understand the difference. Contact R. Callahan, Blackstone Ridge Ranch, Northern Territories. Elena read it twice. The bluntness should have offended her. Instead, something about the advertisement's brutal honesty made her hands shake for the first time in months. "Do you know who he is?" Sarah asked quietly. "No. Rhett Callahan. They call him the Cattle King of the North. Built an empire in 10 years on land nobody else could farm. Runs 5,000 head across territory most men won't cross in summer." Sarah paused. "They also say he's the coldest son of a bitch in 3 territories. Fired a foreman who questioned an order. Bought out neighbors who wouldn't sell. There's stories about him that would freeze your blood." "Stories aren't facts." "No, but facts are facts. He's rich, he's powerful, and he's looking for a woman the way you'd shop for a workhorse, based on whether she'll get the job done." Elena stared at the advertisement. Romantic sentiment discouraged. At least he was honest about it. The other men had pretended to want love while really wanting a cook, a nursemaid, and someone to warm their beds. This Rhett Callahan admitted up front that he wanted a transaction. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked. "I'm thinking I'm 29 years old and working in a school that barely pays enough to feed me. I'm thinking I've been rejected 5 times by men who wanted someone softer, quieter, and less complicated. I'm thinking I'm never going to be that woman, so maybe I should stop pretending I could be." "Elena, I want a child, Sarah. I want a family. I've wanted it so desperately that I humiliated myself 5 times trying to convince strangers to choose me. But this man isn't asking me to be chosen. He's offering a contract. And maybe that's the only kind of arrangement a woman like me deserves." Sarah's expression softened. You deserve more than a business deal. What I deserve and what I can get are two different things. Elena folded the newspaper carefully. Where's the nearest telegraph office? Mustson. 3 weeks later, Elena stood on the platform at Red Hollow's train station with everything she owned packed in 2 trunks and a carpet bag. The entire town had turned out to watch her leave, not because they'd miss her, but because a schoolteacher heading north to marry the infamous Rhett Callahan made for the best gossip Red Hollow had seen in years. Reverend Potter approached, his face arranged in an expression of pastoral concern. Miss Mercer, it's not too late to reconsider. Marriage is a sacred bond, not a business arrangement. Reverend, you've spent 5 years trying to marry me off to any single man who'd have me. Don't pretend to care about sacred bonds now. His face reddened. I care about your immortal soul. Traveling alone to marry a man you've never met. I've corresponded with Mr. Callahan for 3 weeks. He's been more honest in his letters than most men are after courtship. He doesn't want love, and neither do I anymore. We both want something practical, and we've been clear about terms. Terms. The Reverend said the word like it tasted bad. Marriage isn't a cattle contract. Maybe it should be. At least then both parties would know exactly what they're getting. The train whistle cut off his response. Elena turned to Sarah, who'd brought her to the station in the boarding house wagon. You sure about this? Sarah asked. No, but I'm sure about staying here, and that's worse. Sarah pulled her into a brief hug. Write me. Tell me if it's as bad as people say. And if it is, then I'll come get you myself, with a shotgun if necessary. Elena smiled despite the fear coiling in her stomach. She climbed aboard the train, found her seat, and watched Red Hollow disappear into the distance. The frontier rushed past her window, endless plains giving way to forests, then mountains. Each mile took her farther from everything familiar and closer to a man she knew only through carefully worded letters. Dear Miss Mercer, your response to my advertisement demonstrates the practical mindset I require. I appreciate your directness regarding expectations. To be clear, I am not seeking a companion or a love match. I need a woman capable of managing a large household, withstanding harsh frontier conditions, and bearing a child. In return, I offer financial security and social position. If you can accept these terms without romantic illusions, reply immediately. Time is a factor. R. Callahan. She'd written back the same day, matching his bluntness with her own. Mr. Callahan, I am 29, educated, healthy, and uninterested in romantic fantasy. I have been rejected by enough men to understand I am not what frontier husbands typically want. You are offering exactly what I need, security and the chance for a family, without pretending to offer what neither of us believes in. I can manage a household, withstand hardship, and bear a child. I will not interfere in your business or demand affection you cannot give. In return, I expect you to honor your word regarding financial security and treatment. If these terms are acceptable, send travel arrangements. Elena Mercer. 3 more letters had followed, each one negotiating details with the precision of a legal contract. How many servants worked at the ranch? What Elena's specific duties would include, whether she'd have her own quarters or be expected to share his. The discussions had been frank to the point of discomfort, but at least there'd been no deception. The train traveled for 2 days and 1 night before reaching Bitter Creek Junction, the last railway stop before the Northern Territories. Elena stepped onto the platform into air so cold it burned her lungs. Snow covered everything in a thick white blanket that swallowed sound. Miss Mercer? She turned to find a weathered man in his 50s wearing a heavy coat and a skeptical expression. I'm Tom Harding, Mr. Callahan's foreman. I'm here to take you to Blackstone Ridge. How far is the ranch? 6 hours by wagon. We need to leave now if we're going to make it before dark. Storm's coming in tonight. Tom loaded her trunks while Elena climbed into the covered wagon. 2 other ranch hands sat in front, young men who glanced at her with curiosity and something that might have been pity. The wagon lurched forward, and Bitter Creek Junction disappeared behind them. For the first 3 hours, they traveled through dense forest where snow clung to pine branches, and the only sounds were the wagon's creaking and horses breathing. Tom didn't speak except to curse when the wheels hit hidden rocks. The younger hands muttered to each other in voices too low for Elena to hear. Finally, as the forest began to thin, Tom spoke without turning around. You know what you're getting into? I know Mr. Callahan wants a practical arrangement. That what he told you? Tom spat tobacco juice into the snow. Lady, Mr. Callahan don't want anything except control. He's the hardest man I ever worked for, and I've worked for some bastards. He don't tolerate questions, don't tolerate mistakes, don't tolerate anything that disrupts the way he runs his empire. I didn't come here expecting kindness. Good. Because you won't find it. Tom finally turned to look at her, his eyes flat. You'll find a man who built everything he has by being tougher and meaner than everyone around him. You'll find rules and orders and expectations you better meet or suffer the consequences. What consequences? Not beatings, if that's what worries you. Mr. Callahan ain't violent with women, but he's got ways of making you understand when you've disappointed him. Cold ways, silent ways, ways that make you wish he'd just yell instead. Elena pulled her coat tighter. Why do you stay? Because he pays better than anyone else, and he keeps his word. If he says something, it happens. That's rare out here. But don't mistake reliability for compassion. He's reliable like winter. It'll show up every year whether you want it or not. The wagon crested a hill, and Tom pointed ahead. Blackstone Ridge. Elena stared at the valley spread below them. The ranch occupied a plateau surrounded by mountains, a fortress of buildings arranged with military precision. The main house stood 3 stories tall, built from dark timber and stone. Barns, bunkhouses, and outbuildings formed a small town around it. Thousands of cattle dotted the snow-covered pastures, dark shapes against white. It was impressive, and completely isolated. He built all this himself? Elena asked. In 10 years. Came here with nothing but money from selling his dead father's land back east. Bought this territory when everyone said it couldn't support cattle. Proved them all wrong through sheer stubbornness and working harder than any man I've seen. What about his family? Tom's expression went even flatter. Ain't my story to tell. But there's reasons Mr. Callahan is the way he is. Don't make him easier to live with, but there's reasons. They descended into the valley as the sun began setting behind the mountains. By the time the wagon reached the main house, darkness had fallen and snow was starting to fall heavily. Elena climbed down on legs stiff from travel. The house loomed above her, every window blazing with light, but somehow looking cold anyway. The front door opened and a middle-aged woman in a severe dress appeared. I'm Mrs. Crawford, the housekeeper. Follow me. Mr. Callahan is waiting in his study. Elena followed her inside into a massive entry hall. Dark wood, high ceilings. Everything expensive and nothing comfortable. Mrs. Crawford led her down a corridor lined with maps and surveying equipment. Few things you should know, Mrs. Crawford said without slowing. Mr. Callahan expects meals at exact times. He don't tolerate interruptions when he's working. He keeps regular hours and expects everyone else to do the same. You'll have your own room until the wedding, then you'll move to the mistress's quarters. Questions? When is the wedding? 3 days. Circuit judge comes through on Friday. Mr. Callahan don't believe in wasting time. They stopped in front of a heavy oak door. Mrs. Crawford knocked once and opened it without waiting for response. Miss Mercer, sir. Send her in. Elena stepped into the study and got her first look at the man she'd agreed to marry. Rhett Callahan stood behind a massive desk covered with maps and ledgers. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the weathered face of a man who'd spent years in harsh conditions. Dark hair, gray at the temples, eyes the color of winter sky. Everything about him radiated controlled power and absolute certainty. He looked at her with the same expression she'd seen men use when evaluating horses. You're shorter than I expected, he said. You're colder, Elena replied before she could stop herself. His eyebrow raised slightly. I told you in my letters not to expect warmth. Telling me and demonstrating it are different things. Then consider this your first lesson. I say exactly what I mean. No games, no hidden meanings. If I tell you something, that's the truth as I see it. He gestured to a chair. Sit. We have business to discuss. Elena sat, refusing to let him see her nervousness. Rhett remained standing, maintaining the power position. The wedding is in 3 days, he continued. After that, you'll assume management of the household. Mrs. Crawford will train you on routines and expectations. Your primary responsibility is maintaining the house and eventually bearing a child. You will not interfere in ranch operations or business decisions. You will not question my authority in front of the hands. You will maintain appropriate behavior as befits your position. Clear? You're listing rules like I'm an employee. You are an employee. The only difference is your contract includes specific physical responsibilities. Heat flooded Elena's face, but she held his gaze. You want to discuss that now? I want to ensure we understand each other. I need an heir. That requires us to fulfill certain obligations. I will not force you, but I expect cooperation without sentiment or drama. Can you do that? Every instinct told her to run. This man wasn't just cold, he was ice straight through. But she'd known that from his letters. She'd known it when she got on the train. She'd known it, and she'd come anyway because the alternative was dying alone in Red Hollow, having never had the family she desperately wanted. Yes, she said, I can do that. Good. Then we understand each other. He opened a drawer and pulled out a document. This is the contract. Read it carefully. It specifies your duties, your allowance, and the terms of our arrangement. If you find anything unacceptable, say so now. Once we're married, the terms are fixed. Elena took the document. It was 6 pages long, written in precise legal language that covered everything from household budgets to what would happen if she failed to produce a child within 3 years. The clinical details should have been insulting. Instead, she appreciated the clarity. She read every word carefully while Rhett waited in silence. Finally, she looked up. The section about children. It says if I fail to conceive within 3 years, you reserve the right to seek alternatives. What does that mean? It means I would arrange for a divorce and find another wife. And what happens to me? You receive a settlement equal to 3 years' allowance and transportation to wherever you wish to go. You would not be abandoned without resources. Elena nodded slowly. And if I die in childbirth? Any child would be raised here. You would be buried in the family plot with full honors. Your family, if any, would receive a death benefit. I have no family. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to read. Then the benefit would go to a charity of your choosing. You've thought of everything. I don't leave things to chance. He pulled out a pen and ink. If you agree to the terms, sign at the bottom. If not, Tom will take you back to Bitter Creek Junction tomorrow. Elena stared at the contract. This was her last chance to run, to go back to Red Hollow and the safe, small life she'd been living, to avoid tying herself to a man who treated marriage like a cattle contract and who clearly had no interest in her beyond her ability to produce an heir. But going back meant accepting she'd never have the family she wanted, never have a child, never have anything except lonely years teaching other people's children while her own dreams died. She picked up the pen and signed her name. Rhett took the contract, examined her signature, and nodded. Welcome to Blackstone Ridge, Miss Mercer. Mrs. Crawford will show you to your room. Dinner is at 7. Don't be late. Is that all? What else did you expect? I don't know. Some acknowledgement that we just agreed to spend our lives together? We agreed to a business arrangement. The paperwork is complete. The rest is simply execution of terms. He sat down and opened a ledger, clearly dismissing her. Close the door on your way out. Elena stood, her hands trembling with anger she barely controlled. She'd expected him to be cold, but this level of casual dismissal was something else entirely. He'd just agreed to marry her, and he was already back to his ledgers like she was no more important than a cattle shipment. She walked to the door, then turned back. Mr. Callahan? He looked up, irritation flickering across his face. Yes? You told me you say exactly what you mean. So let me do the same. I came here because I want a child and a family, and I'm willing to accept a loveless marriage to get it, but I will not be treated like livestock. You want someone to manage your household and bear your child? Fine. But I'm a human being, not a piece of ranch equipment. Remember that. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then his expression hardened. Are you finished? For now. Good. Because here's something you need to remember, Miss Mercer. This ranch exists because I make hard decisions and enforce them without compromise. Every man here follows my orders without question because that's the only way to survive in this territory. I don't need you to like me. I don't even need you to respect me. But you will obey the terms of our contract, or you'll discover exactly how unpleasant I can make your life without ever raising my voice. Now get out of my study. Elena left, closing the door with controlled precision when she wanted to slam it. Mrs. Crawford waited in the hallway, her expression carefully neutral. This way, miss. Elena followed her upstairs to a room that was comfortable but impersonal, like a hotel, not a home. Her trunks had already been delivered and sat unopened at the foot of the bed. "Dinner's at 7 in the main dining room," Mrs. Crawford said. "Mr. Callahan dines alone except on Sundays when he expects his wife to join him. After the wedding, you'll eat together every Sunday." "Just Sundays?" "Mr. Callahan prefers to dine alone during the work week. Says it's more efficient." "Of course he does." Elena looked at the housekeeper. "Mrs. Crawford, how long have you worked here?" 8 years. "Is he always like this?" "Like what?" "Cold, distant, treating everyone like pieces on a chessboard." Mrs. Crawford's expression didn't change. "Mr. Callahan is a fair employer who pays well and keeps his word. That's all I need from him." "That's not what I asked." "No, but it's the answer you'll get. I don't gossip about Mr. Callahan, and neither does anyone else who wants to keep working here." She moved toward the door. "Unpack, rest. If you need anything, pull the bell cord. Someone will come." After she left, Elena sat on the bed and stared at her hands. They were shaking again, not from fear, but from the sudden crushing realization of what she'd actually done. She'd agreed to marry a man who viewed her as a means to an end. She'd signed a contract that reduced her entire existence to duties and obligations. She'd traveled hundreds of miles into the wilderness to live in a fortress run by a tyrant who couldn't even pretend to care whether she lived or died beyond her ability to give him an heir. And she had 3 days before it became permanent. Elena looked around the room at the expensive furniture and thick rugs and warm fireplace. Everything comfortable except the truth. She was about to marry a man incapable of love, and she'd known it when she signed the papers. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." The door opened to reveal a young Mexican woman carrying towels and a pitcher of water. "I'm Maria, miss. I'll be your lady's maid. Mrs. Crawford sent me to help you unpack." "Thank you, but I can manage." "Mr. Callahan's orders, miss. He says you're to be treated according to your position." Elena almost laughed. According to her position as what? The woman he'd purchased to produce an heir? But Maria looked nervous, so Elena nodded. "All right. Thank you, Maria." They unpacked in silence for a while before Maria spoke hesitantly. "Miss Mercer, can I say something?" "Of course. The other girls, the maids. We're all glad you're here. The house has been lonely, cold. Mr. Callahan, he don't care about anything except the ranch. But a woman in the house, that might change things. Make it feel more like a home instead of just a building. I don't think one woman is going to change Rhett Callahan. Maybe not him, but maybe the house, maybe us." Maria's eyes were hopeful in a way that made Elena's chest tight. "We're hoping you'll be kind to work for." "I'll do my best." Maria smiled and went back to unpacking. Elena walked to the window and stared out at the snow-covered valley. Somewhere out there, Rhett Callahan sat in his study reviewing ledgers and planning strategies, probably not thinking about her at all. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days to decide if she could really go through with this. 3 days to choose between a loveless marriage and returning to Red Hollow, having failed one more time. Outside, the storm Tom had predicted began in earnest, wind howling around the house, and snow falling so thick she couldn't see 20 feet. The valley disappeared into white, and Blackstone Ridge became an island in the wilderness. Elena closed her eyes and thought about the child she wanted so desperately, the family she'd dreamed about for years, the home she'd tried and failed to build 5 times already. Maybe Rhett Callahan would never love her. Maybe this house would never feel warm. Maybe she was making the biggest mistake of her life, but at least it was her choice, her decision, her gamble on a different kind of future. She opened her eyes and turned away from the window. 3 days until she became Mrs. Rhett Callahan. She'd better figure out how to survive what came after. The wedding took place on Friday afternoon in the main parlor with 5 witnesses and no celebration. Elena stood beside Rhett wearing a simple gray dress she'd bought in Red Hollow months ago for a wedding that never happened. Maria had offered to style her hair, but Elena had refused. There seemed little point in making herself pretty for a man who'd made it clear he viewed the ceremony as nothing more than signing another contract. Judge Morrison read through the vows in a bored monotone, while Rhett stared straight ahead with the same expression he probably wore when approving cattle shipments. When the judge asked if Elena took this man, she forced out, "I do," through a throat tight with emotions she couldn't name. Rhett's response was flat and immediate. like checking a box on a form. By the power vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you man and wife. The judge didn't even bother suggesting Rhett kiss his bride. He just closed his book and held out his hand for payment. Rhett counted out bills with mechanical precision, shook the judge's hand, and turned to Elena. Mrs. Crawford has moved your things to the mistress's quarters. Dinner is at 7 as usual. I have work to finish. He walked out of his own wedding without another word. Elena stood frozen while the witnesses filed out with awkward expressions. Mrs. Crawford approached with something that might have been sympathy. Your rooms are on the second floor, east wing. I'll show you. The mistress's quarters consisted of a bedroom, sitting room, and private washroom connected to Rhett's chambers by a door that was currently locked. The rooms were beautiful in the same cold way as everything else. Expensive furniture, thick carpets, and no personal touches whatsoever. His first wife decorated these rooms, Mrs. Crawford said, startling Elena. I didn't know he'd been married before. It's not something he discusses. The housekeeper moved to the window, her expression distant. She died 7 years ago. Influenza. She was only 23. Elena looked around the rooms with new understanding. Everything here had been chosen by a dead woman, and Rhett had left it exactly as it was. A shrine to someone he'd lost. What was she like? Quiet? Gentle. Exactly what a rancher's wife was supposed to be. Mrs. Crawford turned from the window. Nothing like you. Is that a warning? It's an observation. Margaret never questioned him, never challenged him, never did anything except exactly what he expected. You've been here 3 days and you've already argued with him twice that I know of. Should I apologize? I don't know. Margaret never gave him reason to be angry, but I'm not sure she made him happy either. He grieved when she died, but it was the quiet grief of losing something valuable, not the desperate grief of losing someone irreplaceable. Elena sat on the edge of the bed that had belonged to another woman. Why are you telling me this? Because you should know what you're up against. Rhett Callahan loved his first wife the way he loves everything, with control and distance. She got sick and he couldn't control it, couldn't fix it, couldn't order it to stop. She died anyway, and something in him froze solid after that. He swore he'd never let himself care that much about anything again. So he married me with a contract instead of vows. He married you because he needs an heir, and he's not fool enough to think he can run this empire forever alone. But he's going to keep you at arm's length the way he keeps everyone. Don't expect that to change just because you share a bed. After Mrs. Crawford left, Elena explored her new rooms. The closets held Margaret's clothes, outdated dresses and soft colors that would have looked ridiculous on Elena. The vanity held brushes and cosmetics untouched for 7 years. The entire suite felt like a museum to a ghost. She was unpacking her own meager belongings when the connecting door opened without warning. Rhett stood in the doorway, his jacket off and sleeves rolled to his elbows. We should discuss sleeping arrangements. Elena's stomach clenched. Now? When else? We're married. We have obligations to fulfill. It's 3 in the afternoon, and I have ranch business that will keep me occupied until midnight. Unless you'd prefer I wake you then. Heat flooded her face. I'd prefer you knock before entering my rooms. These aren't your rooms. They're rooms in my house that you're permitted to use. But fine, I'll knock in the future if that makes you feel better. He stepped fully into the room, and Elena fought the urge to back away. I'll come to you twice a week until you conceive. Wednesdays and Saturdays. After you're pregnant, I'll leave you alone until after the birth and recovery period. How romantic. I told you romance wasn't part of this arrangement. I'm trying to be considerate by establishing a predictable schedule instead of making demands randomly. Considerate would be treating me like a human being instead of breeding stock. His jaw tightened. I'm treating you exactly as our contract specifies. You knew the terms when you signed. Knowing the terms and living them are different things. Then you should have thought about that before you got on the train. He turned toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I'll try not to make it unpleasant. But I won't pretend to feel things I don't. If you need tenderness or affection, you married the wrong man. He left, closing the door firmly behind him. Elena sat on Margaret's bed in Margaret's rooms wearing her wedding dress to a loveless marriage, and for the first time since leaving Red Hollow, she let herself cry. The next few weeks established a routine that felt less like marriage and more like working in a very strange household. Elena rose at dawn and met with Mrs. Crawford to review the day's meals, cleaning schedules, and supply needs. The ranch employed 12 house staff, 30 ranch hands, and 4 specialized workers, including a blacksmith and a veterinarian. Managing them required organization skills Elena had developed teaching, but the scale was overwhelming. Rhett appeared for breakfast at exactly 6:30 every morning. He read reports while eating, barely acknowledging Elena's presence. After breakfast, he disappeared into his study or rode out with Tom to inspect the ranch. Elena wouldn't see him again until Sunday dinner, where he'd make stilted conversation about household matters before retreating back to his ledgers, except for Wednesday and Saturday nights. Those nights he'd knock on her door at exactly 10 o'clock. She'd let him in. They'd perform their obligations with mechanical efficiency and minimal conversation. Afterward, he'd return to his own rooms without lingering. The whole process took perhaps 30 minutes and left Elena feeling hollow in ways she couldn't articulate. One Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the wedding, Elena was reviewing grocery orders when Maria burst into the morning room looking panicked. "Mrs. Callahan, you need to come quick. There's trouble in town." Elena followed her outside where Tom was dismounting from a lathered horse, his face grim. "What happened?" Elena asked. "Trouble at the land office. Silas Boone's been buying up properties around our territory. Now he's claiming some of our water rights based on old surveys that nobody's seen before." Tom spat into the dirt. "Mr. Callahan's in town dealing with it, but things are getting ugly. Boone brought hired guns." "Where is Red exactly?" "Land office. But Mrs. Callahan, you should stay here. This ain't—" "Get me a horse." "Ma'am, Mr. Callahan was very clear that you're not to involve yourself in ranch business. And I'm very clear that I'm going to town whether you help me or not. Now get me a horse, or I'll saddle one myself." Tom looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. 10 minutes later, Elena was riding toward town with Tom and 2 ranch hands, her inexperience on horseback making every mile painful. The town of Blackwater consisted of 20 buildings clustered around a main street that turned to mud whenever it rained. The land office occupied a storefront near the bank, and a crowd had gathered outside, mostly men, all armed. Elena dismounted clumsily and pushed through the crowd. Tom tried to stop her, but she ignored him. Inside, Rhett stood facing a man who had to be Silas Boone. Florid face, expensive suit, and cruel eyes. 3 men with guns flanked Boone, while Rhett stood alone. "The law is clear," Boone was saying. "These surveys supersede your water claims. You can sell me the affected acreage for fair market value, or you can watch your cattle die of thirst come summer." "Those surveys are forgeries," Rhett said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And you know it. Prove it, or sign the papers." "I'll see you in hell first," Boone smiled. "That can be arranged?" One of his men put his hand on his gun. "Touch that weapon and you'll die before it clears leather," Rhett said without raising his voice. The tension in the room felt like lightning about to strike. Elena stepped forward before she could think better of it. "Mr. Boone, I presume?" Every head turned toward her. Rhett's face went from cold to absolutely furious in an instant. "Elena, get out of here." "Mrs. Callahan," she corrected, keeping her eyes on Boone. "And I believe introductions are in order. I'm Rhett Callahan's wife, and I'm curious about these surveys you're presenting." Boone's smile widened. "The famous mail-order bride. I heard Callahan bought himself a wife. Didn't realize he bought one stupid enough to walk into a powder keg. I walked into a business discussion. Surely you're not threatening violence over a simple land dispute." "There's nothing simple about it when we're talking about water rights worth hundreds of thousands." "Then let's see these remarkable surveys that suddenly appeared after 7 years. Elena held out her hand. "I'm quite good at reading maps. Comes from my teaching background." "Elena." Rhett's voice could have cut steel. "Leave. Now." "This concerns my home and my husband's ranch. I'm not leaving." Boone laughed and handed her the documents. "By all means, Mrs. Callahan, satisfy your curiosity." Elena examined the surveys carefully. They were good forgeries. She'd give them that. The aging was convincing, the signatures looked authentic, and the measurements were precise. But something about the ink bothered her. It was too uniform, lacking the variation that came from genuine age and oxidation. "These are impressive," she said finally. "When did you say they were created?" 1869, Territorial Survey Commission. "Interesting. Because the ink density suggests they were drawn within the last 6 months. The paper's been artificially aged. You can see where the tea staining is uneven. And this signature here, she pointed to a name at the bottom. Theodore Morrison, the same judge who married us 3 weeks ago, which means I've seen his handwriting recently. His letter formation has changed significantly with age. This signature matches his current writing, not how he would have signed 20 years ago. The room went silent. Boone's smile disappeared. You're calling me a liar? I'm calling these documents forgeries, poor ones actually. Any expert would spot that. Boone moved faster than Elena expected, crossing the room and grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. You uppity little... He didn't finish the sentence. Rhett hit him with enough force to send Boone crashing into the wall. Before his men could react, Tom and the ranch hands had guns drawn and aimed. Touch my wife again, and I'll kill you where you stand, Rhett said in that terrible, quiet voice. Boone wiped blood from his mouth, fury twisting his features. You'll regret this, Callahan. Both of you. Get out of my town. Boone left with his men, but not before shooting Elena a look of pure hatred. The moment they were gone, Rhett turned on her. Outside, now. He didn't speak during the entire ride back to the ranch, but Elena could feel rage radiating off him like heat. When they reached the house, he dismounted and walked straight to his study. Elena followed. Don't, he warned without turning around. We need to discuss what just happened. What just happened is you directly disobeyed my explicit orders about not involving yourself in ranch business. What just happened is you put yourself in danger from a man who's already killed people who crossed him. What just happened is you humiliated me in front of the entire town by making it look like I can't control my own wife. Control? Elena's voice rose. I just proved those surveys were forgeries and probably saved your water rights. You proved nothing that wouldn't have come out in court. What you did do is make yourself Boone's enemy, which means I now have to worry about your safety, in addition to everything else. He finally turned to face her, and his eyes were ice. I told you in the beginning, you do not interfere with ranch business. You manage the household. That's all. The ranch is collapsing around you, and you're worried about following rules? What did you say? I've seen the account books, Rhett. I know Mrs. Crawford thinks I don't pay attention, but I do. Your costs are rising faster than your income. You're hemorrhaging money somewhere, and you're too proud to admit you need help figuring out where. His face went absolutely still. You've been going through my private financial records? They were sitting in the morning room. I was doing my job managing household expenses and noticed the numbers didn't make sense. Those books are none of your concern. Everything about this ranch is my concern. I'm your wife, not a decoration. I have skills and intelligence you're wasting because you're too stubborn to accept help from anyone, especially a woman. I don't need help from someone who's been here less than a month and thinks she understands how to run an operation this complex. I understand numbers, and your numbers are wrong somewhere. You're losing cattle, or someone's stealing from you, or your expenses are being deliberately inflated. But you're so busy being in control that you won't even consider the possibility that... Enough. The word cracked like a whip. You want to know why I don't want you involved in ranch business? Because the last time I trusted someone's opinion about operations, I lost $10,000 and 20 men nearly died. Because this empire exists because I make every decision and take full responsibility for every outcome. Because the moment I start delegating to people who don't understand the stakes, everything falls apart. I'm not asking you to delegate. I'm asking you to let me help. I don't need your help. I need you to do what I hired you for. Run the household and give me an heir. That's all. The words hit like a slap. Elena stepped back, feeling something crack inside her chest. Hired. That's how you see this. How you see me. It's what we agreed to. No, we agreed to a marriage, a partnership, not you treating me like a servant who warms your bed twice a week. I've treated you exactly as the contract specifies. If you want something different, you should have negotiated better terms. Elena stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time just how damaged this man really was. He'd built walls so high and thick that he couldn't even see over them anymore. Everything was business. Everything was control. Everything was keeping people at a distance where they couldn't hurt him. Your first wife must have been very lonely, she said quietly. His face went white. Get out. Rhett, I said get out of my study before I say something we'll both regret. Elena left, her hands shaking with anger and hurt, and something else she didn't want to name. She made it to her rooms before the tears started, and this time she didn't try to stop them. That night, he didn't come to her room even though it was Saturday. Elena lay awake listening to him pace in his chambers until long after midnight, the sound of his boots on the floor the only sign he was even thinking about her. The next morning, she woke to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a brief note in Rhett's precise handwriting. "You were right about the surveys. I'm having them examined by an expert. You were wrong to involve yourself without permission. Don't do it again. R." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't even close, but it was acknowledgement, and from Rhett Callahan, that might be the closest thing to concession she'd ever get. Elena got dressed and went downstairs to face another day in her loveless marriage to a man who couldn't even admit when he was drowning. 2 weeks later, Elena discovered exactly how right she'd been about the ranch's problems. She'd started reviewing the household accounts more carefully, looking for patterns. At first, the numbers seemed fine. Food costs, supply expenses, staff wages, all within reasonable ranges. But then she noticed something odd. The quantities ordered didn't match the quantities recorded as received. She started cross-referencing delivery receipts with inventory records. The discrepancies were small at first. A few pounds of flour here, a case of canned goods there. Easy to dismiss as clerical errors. But when she tallied them up over 6 months, the pattern was clear. Someone was skimming supplies and covering their tracks by falsifying receipts. Elena spent 3 nights working by lamplight in her sitting room, building a detailed record of every discrepancy. She documented dates, amounts, and who'd signed for each delivery. The pattern pointed to one person, Jack Wheeler, the ranch's quartermaster who managed all supply orders and inventory. She knew she should tell Rhett immediately, but their relationship had been even more strained since the confrontation in his study. He'd stopped coming to her rooms entirely, and their Sunday dinners had devolved into silence broken only by the sound of silverware on plates. If she brought him incomplete information, he'd dismiss it as another example of her meddling. She needed proof, hard evidence he couldn't ignore. So she did something incredibly stupid. Late one night, when the household was asleep, Elena slipped out of her rooms and made her way to the ranch office where Wheeler kept his records. She'd seen him leave earlier for town and knew he wouldn't be back until morning. The office was locked, but Maria had mentioned once that Mrs. Crawford kept spare keys in her quarters. Elena crept to the housekeeper's room, borrowed the key ring, and let herself into the office. She found the evidence within 20 minutes. Wheeler had been systematic. He'd create false supply orders that looked legitimate, pocket the difference between what was actually delivered and what was recorded, and split the profit with someone at the supply company in town. The paper trail was buried in dozens of ordinary-looking receipts, but once Elena knew what to look for, it was obvious. She was photographing documents with Rhett's camera when she heard boots on the stairs. Wheeler's voice carried through the door. "Told you we need to increase the amounts. Callahan's too busy dealing with Boone to notice." Elena froze. He was supposed to be in town. She looked around frantically for somewhere to hide, but the office was small and sparse. The footsteps were getting closer. She made a desperate decision. She grabbed the most damning documents, blew out her lamp, and squeezed into the narrow space behind a filing cabinet just as the door opened. 2 men entered, Wheeler and someone Elena didn't recognize. They lit a lamp, and she could see them through the gap between the cabinet and the wall. "How much longer can we keep this up?" the stranger asked. "As long as it takes. Boone wants Callahan broke and desperate. Every dollar we steal puts more pressure on him." Wheeler pulled out a ledger. "He's already cutting costs everywhere. Another few months and he'll be forced to sell. And if someone notices the missing supplies?" "Who's going to notice? That stupid wife of his is too busy playing house to understand how ranching works. Callahan's too proud to admit he needs help. We're invisible." Elena's hands clenched. She wanted to burst out and confront them, but she was one woman against 2 men in an isolated office in the middle of the night. She forced herself to stay still and listen. They reviewed their operation for another 10 minutes before Wheeler locked up and they left. Elena waited in her hiding spot for another 30 minutes, barely breathing, before she dared to move. She slipped out of the office and back to her rooms just as dawn was breaking. Her hands shook as she laid out the documents she'd stolen. This was proof of theft and conspiracy, evidence of Boone's involvement, everything Rhett needed to know. She had to tell him. Now, before Wheeler realized the documents were missing. Elena found him in the stable yard at dawn, preparing to ride out with Tom and a crew to check fence lines. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his face haggard in the early light. Rhett, I need to talk to you. Not now. We have 100 miles of fence to inspect. It's important. It's about the ranch. His jaw tightened. Elena, we've discussed this. You need to stay out of... Jack Wheeler is stealing from you. He's working with Silas Boone to bleed the ranch dry. That got his attention. He turned fully toward her, his expression unreadable. What are you talking about? I've been reviewing the household accounts and found discrepancies in the supply orders. I investigated last night and discovered Wheeler's been falsifying receipts for months. He's stealing supplies and splitting the profit with someone in town. I heard him admit he's working for Boone. You investigated. Last night. By yourself. I had to be sure before I came to you. You went through ranch records without permission. Again. Did you hear what I said? Your quartermaster is stealing from you as part of a conspiracy to bankrupt the ranch. I heard you. I also heard that you once again directly violated my explicit orders about not involving yourself in ranch business. He moved closer, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet. Where exactly were you investigating last night? The ranch office. Wheeler's office? The one that's kept locked? I borrowed Mrs. Crawford's keys. You broke into a secured office in the middle of the night to go through confidential records. I found proof, Rhett. Look. She held out the documents. He didn't take them. Instead, he called over his shoulder, Tom, postpone the fence inspection. Get Wheeler to my study immediately. And bring 2 men you trust absolutely. Tom looked between them, clearly sensing the tension, but nodded and rode off. Rhett turned back to Elena. Give me the documents, then go to the house and stay in your rooms until I send for you. I want to be there when you confront him. No. Rhett, I'm the one who discovered this. You should have come to me immediately instead of playing detective in the middle of the night. You should have trusted me to handle my own ranch. You should have done a lot of things differently, Elena, but you didn't. So now you're going to go to the house and let me deal with the consequences of your actions. My actions? I just saved your ranch. You just broke into a staff member's office based on suspicions you couldn't prove. You stole documents without authorization. You've potentially compromised any legal case we might build because the evidence was obtained illegally. And you did all of this without telling me because you were too arrogant to think you needed help. The words hit like physical blows. Elena stepped back, hurt and anger warring in her chest. I was trying to help you. I don't want your help. I want your obedience. That's what we agreed to. No, you agreed to that. I agreed to be your wife, not your possession. Then you misunderstood the contract. They stared at each other across a gap that felt wider than the entire valley. Elena realized with sudden crushing clarity that nothing she did would ever be enough for this man. She could save the ranch 100 times, and he'd still see her as nothing more than a problem to manage. Fine, she said quietly. I'll go to my rooms. I'll stay out of your business. I'll be exactly what you want me to be, a silent, obedient wife who exists only to serve your needs. Elena, but don't expect me to care what happens to you or this ranch anymore. You want to drown in your pride? Go ahead. I won't watch. She turned and walked away before he could respond. Her vision blurring with tears, she refused to let fall until she was safely back in Margaret's rooms with the door locked behind her. An hour later, she heard shouting from downstairs. Wheeler's voice, raised in denial, Rhett's, cold as winter, Tom's, grim and steady. Then footsteps and the sound of someone being forcibly removed from the house. Maria knocked on Elena's door an hour after that. Mrs. Callahan, Mr. Callahan sent me to tell you that Wheeler confessed to everything. He and another man have been arrested. The sheriff's investigating the connection to Mr. Boone. Thank you, Maria. Mr. Callahan also said, the maid hesitated. He said to tell you that your information was accurate and helpful. How generous of him. Maria bit her lip. Ma'am, if I can say something? The men are talking. They're impressed that you figured out what Wheeler was doing. Tom said you probably saved the ranch from going under. They're starting to respect you. But my husband doesn't. I don't think that's true, ma'am. I think he's scared. Elena looked at her in surprise. Scared of what? Of needing you. Of depending on someone again. Mrs. Crawford told me about his first wife. How he couldn't save her when she got sick. I think he's afraid that if he lets himself care about you, he'll lose you too. So he keeps pushing you away before you can hurt him. That's not my problem to fix. Maybe not. But it seems sad, doesn't it? Two people who could help each other, both too proud and hurt to try. After Maria left, Elena sat by the window watching snow fall across the valley. She thought about Rhett in his study, probably reviewing the evidence alone instead of celebrating the victory. She thought about their hollow marriage and the child they were supposed to create together. She thought about how tired she was of fighting to be seen by a man determined to stay blind. She didn't see him for 3 days. On the 4th day, a knock came at her door just after dawn. She opened it to find Rhett standing there, looking like he hadn't slept. "May I come in?" Elena stepped aside. He entered her sitting room and stood awkwardly, like he didn't know what to do with his hands. "Wheeler confessed to everything," he said finally, "including that Boone's been orchestrating attacks on my business for over a year. The sheriff arrested Boone this morning on conspiracy charges. Your evidence was key to making the case. I'm glad I could help. Elena, if that's all, I have household duties to attend to." "It's not all." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so uncharacteristically uncertain that Elena almost didn't recognize him. "I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies, actually." She waited. "You were right about the ranch having problems I couldn't see. You were right to investigate. You were right to bring me evidence. And I was wrong to dismiss your help and treat you like you were interfering instead of contributing. That must have been hard for you to say." "It was. But it's true." He met her eyes directly. "I've spent 7 years building walls to protect myself from getting hurt again. I've told myself that keeping everyone at a distance was strength, when really it was cowardice. You've been trying to be a real wife to me, and I've been treating you like a business arrangement because it felt safer. It is safer. For you. Maybe. But it's also lonely and miserable and unfair to you." He took a breath. "I can't promise to be the husband you deserve. I don't know if I remember how to let someone in. But I'd like to try. If you're willing to give me a chance." Elena studied him carefully. He looked genuine, exhausted and uncertain and more human than she'd ever seen him. Part of her wanted to accept the apology and believe things would change. But another part remembered 3 weeks of being treated like breeding stock and knew that one apology didn't erase that hurt. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. "I'm proposing we try to make this marriage real, not just a contract. I want to include you in ranch decisions. Value your input. Treat you as a partner instead of an employee. And what do you want from me? Patience, understanding, help learning how to be human again instead of just a tyrant running an empire." Elena walked to the window, looking out at Blackstone Ridge stretching across the valley. Everything she'd worked for was here. The family she wanted, the home she'd dreamed of, the chance to build something meaningful. But only if the man offering partnership actually meant it. She turned back to face him. "I'll give you a chance, one chance. But Rhett, if you go back to treating me like a possession or dismissing my contributions, I won't wait for you to come around again. I'll leave, and you can find another woman willing to tolerate your walls." "Understood. And I want to be involved in ranch decisions. Real involvement, not just telling you my thoughts and having you ignore them." "Agreed." And we start over. No more Wednesday and Saturday schedules like I'm a chore on your calendar. If we're going to create a child together, it has to mean something. He nodded slowly. "What do you suggest?" "I suggest we try being married first, actually getting to know each other, building trust. Then when we're together, it's because we choose to be, not because a contract says so. That could take time. Good things usually do." He studied her for a long moment, then held out his hand. "Deal?" Elena looked at his outstretched hand, calloused from years of hard work, steady despite the uncertainty in his eyes. She thought about everything that had led her to this moment. The rejections in Red Hollow, the desperate decision to answer his advertisement, the lonely weeks trying to survive in a loveless marriage, and now, unexpectedly, a chance to build something real. She took his hand. "Deal." The change didn't happen overnight. Rhett was still Rhett, controlled, reserved, and more comfortable with ledgers than conversation. But he started showing up for breakfast and actually talking to her instead of just reading reports. Small things at first. Asking about her day. Listening when she spoke about household management. Not walking away when she offered opinions. 2 weeks after their agreement, he knocked on her sitting room door after dinner carrying a stack of papers. Do you have time to look at something? Elena set down her book. Of course. He spread the papers across her table, detailed maps of the ranch territory with notes in his precise handwriting. I'm trying to decide whether to expand the northern grazing range or invest in better irrigation for the southern pastures. Both would help, but I can only afford one right now. You're asking my opinion? I'm asking for your help. You see patterns I miss. You proved that with Wheeler. He pointed to the northern section. Tom wants to expand north. Says we could run another 1,000 head if we push into the high country. But it's risky. Harsh winters, predators, difficult terrain. Elena studied the maps carefully. What about water access? There's a creek that runs year-round, but it freezes solid 4 months of the year. And the southern irrigation would guarantee water during drought season, but we can't expand the herd without more grazing land. We'd be stable, but not growing. Elena traced the property lines with her finger, thinking, what's your actual goal? Growth or security? Both. You can't have both. Not immediately. She looked up at him. Rhett, you've been running this ranch in crisis mode for years, expanding aggressively, taking risks, pushing for growth because you're afraid that if you stop moving forward, you'll lose everything. But you're stretched thin. One bad winter or one market crash, and everything falls apart. His jaw tightened. You think I should choose security? I think you should choose sustainability. Invest in irrigation, secure what you have. Then in 2 years when you're more stable, expand north if it still makes sense. Tom will be furious. He's been pushing for northern expansion for months. Tom's a good foreman, but he's not the one who'll lose everything if the gamble fails. You are. Rhett stared at the maps for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he gathered the papers. You're right. I'll tell Tom tomorrow. Just like that? You gave me good reasoning. I'd be an idiot to ignore it just because it's not what I wanted to hear. He paused at the door. Thank you. After he left, Elena sat alone trying to process what had just happened. He'd asked for her help, listened to her advice, and actually planned to follow it. It was such a small thing, but it felt enormous. The next morning at breakfast, Rhett looked up from his coffee. Would you like to ride out with me today? I'm inspecting the southern irrigation sites. Since you're the one who convinced me to invest there, you should see what we're working with. I'm not much of a rider. I noticed, but you'll never get better avoiding it. Besides, I'll keep the pace slow. Elena agreed, and an hour later found herself on a gentle mare following Rhett across the ranch. He was right. She was terrible at riding, but he was patient, stopping when she needed breaks and not commenting when she struggled with the reins. They spent the morning examining creek beds and discussing water flow. Rhett explained his plans while Elena asked questions, and somewhere in the middle of talking about irrigation ditches and water rights, she realized they were actually having a conversation. Not a business discussion or a contractual obligation, an actual conversation between two people working toward the same goal. You really love this place, she said as they stopped for lunch by a frozen stream. It's all I have. That's sad. He looked at her sharply. Why? Because you've built this incredible empire, but you're so afraid of losing it that you can't enjoy having it. You work constantly, trust no one, and treat every day like a battle you might lose. That's how you survive out here. Maybe. Or maybe that's how you stay alone. Elena unwrapped the sandwiches Mrs. Crawford had packed. When's the last time you did something just because you wanted to? Not because it helped the ranch or protected your interests, but just because it made you happy. Rhett was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, I don't remember. That's what I thought. They ate in silence for a while. Then Rhett said quietly, after Margaret died, I threw myself into the ranch because work was easier than grief. Building something felt better than mourning someone. And then years passed and work was all I knew how to do anymore. I forgot there was supposed to be more to life. It's not too late to remember, isn't it? I'm 34 years old and I don't know how to have a normal conversation without turning it into a business discussion. I don't know how to relax. I don't even know what I'd do with free time if I had it. You could start by finishing lunch without reviewing mental inventories. He looked startled. How did you know? Because you do it every meal. Your eyes go distant, and I can practically see you counting cattle and calculating costs instead of tasting your food. It's habit. Bad habit. Try this. Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with the ranch. Like what? Anything, favorite color, childhood memory, something you're afraid of, anything that reminds me you're human. Rhett looked profoundly uncomfortable. I don't talk about personal things. I noticed. Try anyway. He stared at the frozen stream like it might provide answers. I'm afraid of fire. When I was 8, a barn burned on my father's property. 3 horses died because we couldn't get them out in time. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. Elena felt something shift in her chest. It was such a small confession, but coming from him it felt huge. Thank you for telling me. Your turn. Tell me something personal. I'm afraid of being forgotten, of living a whole life and leaving nothing behind that matters. That's why I wanted to teach, to make a difference in children's lives, and why I want a family so desperately. I need to know that after I'm gone, something of me continues. They looked at each other across the remains of lunch, and for the first time, Elena felt like she was seeing the real man beneath the armor, scared, lonely, just as desperate for connection as she was, but with no idea how to achieve it. We're quite a pair, Rhett said finally. Both terrified and both terrible at admitting it. Maybe that's why we might actually work. We're too stubborn to quit even when it's hard. Is this hard for you? Being married to me? Elena considered lying, then decided honesty served them better. Sometimes, you're difficult and controlling and you have walls so high I can't see over them. But you're also honest and hardworking and you're trying. That counts for something. What about the rest of it? The physical aspects of our arrangement? Heat flooded her face. They'd been avoiding this topic since their agreement to start over. What about it? You said you wanted it to mean something. I've been giving you space, but I don't know how long we should wait or what you're expecting from me. I don't know either. I've never done this before. Tried to build intimacy with someone who started as a stranger. She met his eyes. What do you want? Honestly, I want things to be simple. I want to follow the contract and not worry about feelings or complications. But I also know that's not fair to you, and it's not really what I want either. I'm just scared. Of what? Of caring about you and losing you like I lost Margaret, of letting you matter and then watching you die or leave or realize I'm not worth the effort. Elena reached across and took his hand. He stiffened but didn't pull away. I can't promise I won't die or leave, but I can promise I'm here now, and I'm trying just as hard as you are to make this work. Maybe that's enough to start with. He looked at their joined hands like he wasn't sure what to do with the contact. Finally, he squeezed gently. Maybe it is. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, and that night Rhett knocked on her door just to say goodnight. It was such a small gesture, but Elena lay awake afterward feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. The respite didn't last long. 3 days later, Elena was in town picking up supplies when she overheard 2 women talking outside the general store. Heard she used to be a mail-order bride. Failed 5 times before Callahan was desperate enough to take her. Desperate or stupid, marrying a woman like that? Too educated for her own good, from what I hear. Probably can't even cook properly. And barren, I'd wager. Why else would she end up with Callahan? Real women get real husbands, not business arrangements with rich men buying heirs. Elena stood frozen behind a shelf, their words cutting deeper than they should. She'd known the town gossiped about her, but hearing it spoken so casually, the casual cruelty of women who'd never been desperate enough to understand her choices, made her feel sick. She finished her shopping in silence and was loading supplies into the wagon when Sarah Chen appeared. Elena hadn't seen her since leaving Red Hollow months ago. Sarah, what are you doing here? Came to visit my sister in Blackwater. Heard you were in town and wanted to see how you're doing. Sarah's eyes searched her face. Are you all right? Fine. Just some unkind gossip. I heard it too. Ignore them. Small-minded people always tear down what they don't understand. They called me barren. You've been married, what, 2 months? Even if you were trying, it's too soon to know anything. Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back hard. It doesn't matter. Let them talk. It does matter when it hurts you. Sarah touched her arm gently. How is he? Your husband? Better. We're trying to actually be married instead of just coexisting. That's good. But Elena, be careful. I've heard things about Silas Boone since he was arrested. He's not the type to let humiliation go. He blames you for exposing his schemes. He's in jail, for now, but his lawyers are good and he has powerful friends. Watch yourself. After Sarah left, Elena drove the wagon back to the ranch, trying to shake the feeling that something bad was coming. She couldn't. The sky felt too heavy, the air too still, like the world was holding its breath before a storm. That night at dinner, Rhett noticed her distraction. Something wrong? Just gossip in town, nothing important. What kind of gossip? Elena hesitated, then decided honesty was better. The women think I'm a failure who trapped you into marriage because no real man wanted me. They think I'm probably barren and useless. His fork clattered against his plate. Who said this? Does it matter? Yes, it matters. You're my wife. They insult you. They insult me. Rhett, you can't fight every person who gossips. That's half the territory. Then I'll make an example of the first one so the rest learn to keep their mouths shut. That will only make it worse. They'll say I went running to my husband like a child instead of handling it myself. How would you handle it? By proving them wrong. By being so good at my job and so valuable to this ranch that they can't dismiss me as just some desperate woman you bought. Rhett studied her across the table. You care what they think. Of course I care. I'm human. It hurts to be mocked and dismissed. Then let me defend you. I don't need defending. I need respect. And that has to be earned, not demanded. He looked frustrated but nodded slowly. Fine. But if anyone crosses the line from gossip to harassment, you tell me immediately. Agreed. 2 weeks later, the first real crisis hit. A blizzard rolled in without warning, the kind of storm that turned the world white and killed anyone caught unprepared. Tom burst into the house at dawn, looking panicked. Mr. Callahan, we've got 300 head trapped in the North Canyon. If we don't get them out before the pass closes, they'll freeze to death or starve. Rhett was already moving toward the door. How many men? I can spare 8. Rest need to stay here protecting the buildings and the livestock we can reach. That's not enough. We need at least 12 to move that many cattle through a blizzard. We don't have 12. Elena appeared in the doorway already dressed in warm clothes. You have 9. I'm coming. Both men stared at her. No, Rhett said flatly. You need more hands. I can ride well enough to help. You can barely stay on a horse in good weather. A blizzard drive will kill you. Then teach me quickly, or accept that you're 3 men short. Elena, this isn't housework you can just decide to help with. This is dangerous. People die in storms like this. And 300 cattle die if we don't try. I'm not asking permission, Rhett. I'm telling you I'm coming. They locked eyes in a battle of wills. Finally, Tom cleared his throat. Sir, we're wasting time arguing. If she's coming, we need to leave now. Rhett looked like he wanted to physically carry Elena back to her rooms. Instead, he bit out, Fine, but you follow orders exactly. No heroics. No taking risks. You do what Tom says when he says it. Understood? Understood. 20 minutes later, Elena was on horseback riding into the worst storm she'd ever seen. The wind cut like knives and snow fell so thick she could barely see the man in front of her. Tom positioned her in the middle of the group where she'd be most protected, but the cold still seeped through every layer of clothing. It took 2 hours to reach the canyon where the cattle huddled against the cliff face. Getting them moving required shouting, prodding, and constant maneuvering to prevent stampedes or animals breaking away from the herd. Elena's job was simple: ride the western flank and keep stragglers from wandering off. Simple in theory, terrifying in practice. Her horse kept slipping on ice. Wind tore at her clothes. She couldn't feel her fingers or toes. But she stayed in position, driving confused cattle back toward the main group, her voice hoarse from shouting over the wind. They were halfway through the pass when disaster struck. A section of the canyon wall, weakened by ice and wind, gave way with a sound like thunder. Tons of snow and rock crashed down directly into the herd's path. Cattle panicked and scattered. Men shouted warnings. And Elena's horse reared in terror, throwing her into a snowbank. She hit hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except lie in the snow watching chaos unfold around her. Then strong hands grabbed her and hauled her upright. Rhett's face appeared inches from hers, pale with fear. Are you hurt? I don't think so. Can you ride? Yes. Then get back on your horse. We have to reroute before the whole pass collapses. Elena climbed back onto her trembling mare, while Rhett shouted orders. The planned route was blocked. They needed an alternative fast or risk losing the entire herd. "There's no other way through," Tom yelled over the wind. "The southern route takes twice as long, and we don't have the time." Elena's mind raced. She'd spent weeks studying maps of the ranch territory. There had been something, an old notation on one of the survey maps about a smuggler's route through the mountains. A narrow pass that connected the northern canyon to the valley below. "Wait!" She pushed her horse toward Rhett and Tom. "There's another route. An old smuggler's pass marked on the 1871 territorial survey. It comes out near the eastern boundary." "That pass hasn't been used in 50 years, Tom said. "Could be blocked. Could be too narrow for cattle." "It's our only option," Rhett said, making the decision instantly. "Elena, can you find it?" "I think so. The map showed it starting about half a mile north of here." "Then lead. Tom, follow with the herd. Everyone else keep the cattle moving and pray this works." Elena kicked her horse forward, trying to remember the exact details from the map. North half a mile, then a gap in the rock face marked by a split pine. The snow was so thick she almost missed it, a narrow opening barely wide enough for 2 cattle side by side. "There!" She guided her horse into the gap. The walls rose on either side, blocking the worst of the wind, but creating an oppressive sense of being trapped. Behind her, she heard Tom and the others driving the cattle forward. The pass twisted and turned like a snake. Several times Elena thought they'd reached a dead end, only to find the path continued around a corner. The cattle moved slowly, nervous in the confined space. They were 3/4 through when Elena heard a sound that made her blood freeze, a deep rumbling from above. "Avalanche!" someone screamed. Snow and ice roared down the mountain face toward them. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Elena did the only thing she could. She spurred her horse forward, racing for the exit she could just barely see ahead. The avalanche hit behind her like a fist. The force of it threw her horse forward. She clung to the saddle desperately as they burst out of the pass into the valley below. She made it. But as she turned to look back, her heart stopped. The pass was completely blocked. Thousands of tons of snow had sealed it shut. And Rhett had been somewhere in the middle of that column. "No!" Elena tried to turn her horse back, but Tom grabbed her reins. "It's too late. The pass is gone. Rhett's in there. And we can't help him by getting ourselves killed." Elena fought him, screaming Rhett's name until her voice gave out. But Tom was right. There was nothing they could do. The pass was sealed solid. They stood in the wind and snow waiting for something, anything, some sign of life. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Elena couldn't feel anything except overwhelming terror. He couldn't be dead. Not now. Not after they'd finally started building something real. Not after she'd started caring about him in ways that terrified her. She'd come west expecting a business arrangement. Somewhere along the way, without noticing exactly when, it had become so much more. "Please," she whispered to no one. "Please let him be alive." Then, like a miracle, movement at the southern edge of the avalanche. A hand breaking through the snow. Then another. Then Rhett's head emerging as he dragged himself free, covered in ice but alive. Elena was off her horse and running before she could think. She hit him hard enough to knock them both down, her arms wrapping around him, checking frantically for injuries. "Are you hurt? Broken bones? Can you breathe?" "I'm fine." His voice was hoarse. "The others?" "Made it through. The cattle too. Everyone's safe." He pulled back to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You saved us. That pass was the only reason we survived." "I just remembered a map." "You remembered when no one else did. You stayed calm when everyone else panicked. You led us through conditions that would have killed most men." His hands came up to frame her face. "You terrified me today. When you fell, when the avalanche hit, all I could think was that I might lose you before I told you." He stopped, seeming to wrestle with words. "Told me what?" Elena whispered. "That you matter, that somewhere in the last few weeks you stopped being a contract and became—" He struggled, then gave up on words and kissed her instead. It wasn't like the mechanical kisses they'd shared before. This was desperate and fierce and full of emotions neither of them could name. Elena kissed him back just as fiercely, her cold hands tangling in his frozen hair, both of them shaking from more than just the cold. When they finally broke apart, Rhett rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. How to let someone in, how to risk caring again, but I want to try. With you. Then we'll figure it out together. Tom cleared his throat loudly. Hate to interrupt, but we're all freezing to death. Can the emotional declarations wait until we're back at the ranch? Rhett laughed, an actual laugh that Elena had never heard before. Fair point. Let's go home. They rode back through the dying storm, exhausted and frozen, but alive. The ranch hands who'd stayed behind cheered when they saw the herd returning safely. News of Elena's role spread quickly, the woman who'd remembered the smugglers' pass and led them to safety. That night, half frozen and exhausted, Elena soaked in a hot bath while Maria fussed over her. The whole ranch is talking about you, ma'am, saying you're the bravest woman they've ever seen. I'm not brave, I was terrified the entire time. That's what makes it brave, being scared and doing it anyway. Maria wrapped her in warm towels. Mr. Callahan's been asking after you every 10 minutes. I've never seen him so concerned about anyone. After Maria left, Elena dried off and put on her nightgown, wondering if Rhett would come to her rooms. They'd crossed some invisible line today. The kiss had been real. His admission had been real. Everything had changed. A soft knock answered her question. She opened the door to find Rhett clean but still looking exhausted, his hair damp from his own bath. Can I come in? She stepped aside. He entered slowly, like he wasn't sure of his welcome. How are you feeling? He asked. Sore. Cold. Alive. I'm sorry I brought you into that. You could have died because I was too stubborn to refuse your help. Or 300 cattle and 8 men could have died because you were too proud to accept it. We made it through, Rhett. Together. He moved closer, his eyes searching her face. When you fell, when I thought the avalanche might have buried you, I realized something. I've been telling myself this was still just a contract because admitting it was more terrified me. But today I faced losing you, and I knew I'd been lying to myself. What are you saying? I'm saying you're not just my wife on paper anymore. You're someone I care about, someone I depend on, someone I... He stopped, the words clearly too difficult. Elena stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Someone you what? Someone I'm starting to love. The words hung in the air between them, raw and uncertain, and completely honest. I'm not good at this, Rhett continued. I'll probably mess it up. I'll get controlling and distant and forget how to be human. But I want to try. I want this marriage to be real. Elena reached up to touch his face, her hand gentle on his cold skin. It already is real. It became real the moment we stopped pretending we didn't need each other. He kissed her again, slower this time, but no less intense. His hand settled on her waist, pulling her closer, and Elena felt the difference immediately. This wasn't obligation or contract. This was choice. She pulled back slightly. Rhett, are you sure? We don't have to rush this just because of what happened today. I'm not rushing. I'm finally stopping running away from what I've been feeling since you exposed Wheeler's theft. Maybe longer. His thumb traced her jawline. But only if you want this too. I do. But I'm scared. Of what? Of this not being real. Of waking up tomorrow and finding out you've gone back to being the cold man who treated me like breeding stock. I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I promise I won't go back to that. Whatever we are now, we move forward. No retreating behind walls. Elena searched his eyes and found nothing but honesty. Whatever happened next, they were taking the leap together. She kissed him in answer, and this time when he lifted her and carried her to the bed, it felt like the beginning of something new. Not a contract obligation, not a schedule to maintain. Just two broken people choosing to trust each other with their scars. Later, lying in his arms while snow continued falling outside, Elena felt something shift inside her chest. She'd come west looking for security and a family. She'd found something she never expected, a partnership with a man who was learning to be human again. What are you thinking? Rhett asked, his voice drowsy. That I'm glad I answered your advertisement. Even though I've been terrible to you? Even though. Because terrible Rhett led to this Rhett, and I think I might be falling in love with this one. His arms tightened around her. Good. Because I'm definitely falling for you. They fell asleep tangled together the first night they'd shared a bed by choice instead of contract. But in town, Silas Boone sat in a jail cell making plans. His lawyers had posted bail. He'd be free in 3 days. And when he got out, he had every intention of destroying the woman who'd humiliated him and the man who'd dared to challenge his power. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to hit Blackstone Ridge. News of Boone's release reached the ranch 3 days later through a telegram delivered by a nervous courier. Rhett read it at breakfast, his expression going from relaxed to stone in seconds. "He's out." Elena set down her coffee. "When?" "This morning. Posted bail and walked out flanked by lawyers and hired guns." He crumpled the telegram. "The judge who granted bail is Carter Meadows, one of the men Boone's had in his pocket for years." Tch! Can he do that? Just buy his way out after what he did? He can when he owns half the territorial government. Rhett stood and walked to the window, staring out at the ranch. This isn't over. It's just beginning. Elena joined him, slipping her hand into his. The gesture still felt new enough to surprise them both, but he held on tight. "What do we do?" "We prepare. Double the guards. Keep everyone close to the ranch, and we don't give him any opening to strike at us." Tom appeared in the doorway looking grim. "Sir, we've got problems. 3 of the hands quit this morning, said they got better offers elsewhere." Elsewhere meaning Boone. "That'd be my guess, and there's more. The bank in Blackwater sent notice that our credit line is being reviewed. They want full documentation of all assets and liabilities within 2 weeks. Rhett's jaw clenched. Boone's putting pressure on them, threatening to move his accounts if they keep backing us. "What does that mean?" Elena asked. "It means if they call our loans, we have to pay everything immediately or lose the ranch. We don't have that kind of cash on hand." He turned to Tom. "How much do we have in reserves?" "Maybe enough to cover 3 months of operations. Not enough to pay off the loans." Elena's mind raced. "What about the cattle? Can we sell early?" "Market's down. We'd take a massive loss selling now instead of waiting for spring prices. So we're trapped. We can't pay the loans immediately, and we can't afford to sell the cattle at current prices. Welcome to Boone's strategy. He doesn't need to attack us directly. He just needs to squeeze us financially until we have no choice but to sell to him at whatever price he offers." Tom cleared his throat. "There might be another option. The small ranchers around us are in similar positions. Boone's been trying to buy them out for months. If we could organize them, pool resources, share costs, we might be able to hold out longer." Rhett shook his head. "Those ranchers hate me. I've spent years refusing to help them, undercutting their prices, buying up their water rights. Why would they ally with me now?" "Because Boone's their enemy too," Elena said quietly. "And sometimes, the enemy of your enemy is worth talking to." "They won't listen to me. Then don't ask them. Let me do it." Both men stared at her. "Absolutely not," Rhett said. "Elena, these are hard men who've been fighting to survive for years. They're not going to listen to a woman? To your wife? You're right, they probably won't. But they might listen to someone who's not you. Someone who doesn't carry your reputation. Someone who can approach this as a partnership instead of Rhett Callahan dictating terms." "It's too dangerous. If Boone finds out you're organizing against him, he's already our enemy. What's he going to do? Become more of one?" Elena squeezed his hand. "Rhett, you can't do this alone. You've been trying to for years and it's killing you. Let me help. Let me try." He looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But Tom goes with you, and you're armed." "I don't know how to shoot." "Then you'll learn. Today." 2 hours later, Elena stood in the yard behind the barn with a rifle that felt absurdly heavy in her hands while Rhett positioned himself behind her. "Plant your feet, shoulder the stock firmly, line up the sight with the target." "This feels wrong." "It'll feel worse if you need it and don't know how to use it." His hands adjusted her grip. "Breathe out slowly and squeeze the trigger between heartbeats." Elena fired. The recoil nearly knocked her backward, but Rhett steadied her. The shot went wide, missing the target by 3 feet. "Again!" They practiced for an hour until her shoulder ached and her ears rang despite the cotton wadding. By the end, she could hit the target more often than not, though calling it marksmanship would have been generous. "It'll do," Rhett said finally. "You won't win any contests, but you can defend yourself in an emergency." That night, Elena lay awake planning her approach to the neighboring ranchers. She needed to convince men who had every reason to distrust her husband that alliance was their best option. It wouldn't be easy. But nothing about her life since answering Rhett's advertisement had been easy. She started the next morning with the closest neighbor, a Swedish immigrant named Lars Bergstrom, who ran a small cattle operation 5 miles south. Tom accompanied her, looking skeptical about the entire venture. Bergstrom's ranch was modest, a simple house, one barn, maybe 200 head of cattle. He met them in the yard with a rifle and a hostile expression. "Mrs. Callahan, didn't expect to see you here." "I came to talk business, Mr. Bergstrom. Got no business with Callahan or anyone connected to him. Not even if that business involves stopping Silas Boone from taking your ranch?" That got his attention. He lowered the rifle slightly. "What are you talking about?" "Boone's trying to bankrupt my husband by pressuring the bank and stealing his workers. But he's doing the same thing to you and every other small rancher in the territory. Once he takes us down, you're next. Unless we work together." "Work together how?" "Pool resources, share water rights during drought, coordinate cattle drives to reduce costs, create a cooperative that's strong enough to resist Boone's pressure." Elena met his eyes steadily. "I know my husband hasn't been a good neighbor. He's been competitive and aggressive and unwilling to help when you needed it. But Boone is worse. He doesn't just want to compete, he wants to own everything. If we don't stand together, we'll fall separately." Bergstrom studied her for a long moment. "Why should I trust anything a Callahan says?" "Because I'm not asking you to trust. I'm asking you to be practical. Look at the numbers. How long can you hold out against Boone alone?" "Long as I need to." "Really? Because I heard he offered to buy your land last month. How long before that offer becomes a threat?" His expression darkened. "You know about that? I know Boone's pattern. He offers fair prices first. Then the price drops. Then accidents start happening. Then people disappear or die in convenient ways. I know because he tried the same thing with my husband." Bergstrom was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "What exactly are you proposing?" Elena spent the next hour explaining her plan. A formal cooperative agreement, shared access to water during drought, joint cattle drives to reduce costs, mutual defense against Boone's intimidation. By the time she finished, Bergstrom looked thoughtful instead of hostile. "I'll think about it. Talk to some of the others. But I ain't promising nothing. That's all I ask." Over the next 2 weeks, Elena visited every small rancher within 20 miles. Some refused to even speak with her. Others listened but remained skeptical. A few, like Bergstrom and a tough widow named Sarah Mackenzie, seemed genuinely interested. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Elena was meeting with the Mackenzie widow when a rider arrived with news that Boone's men had burned down a barn belonging to a rancher named Patrick O'Brien. No one was hurt, but O'Brien's winter hay had been destroyed, leaving his cattle with nothing to eat until spring. "That's a death sentence," Sarah Mackenzie said flatly. "Without hay, his herd dies. Without the herd, he loses everything." Elena made a decision. "How much hay do we have in reserve at Blackstone Ridge?" Tom looked uncomfortable. "Enough for our own needs with maybe 20% surplus." "Load half the surplus and take it to O'Brien. Tell him it's a loan. He can pay us back in spring with cattle or cash, whichever works better for him." "Mrs. Callahan, Mr. Callahan specifically said not to give away ranch resources without his approval." "Then I'll deal with his anger later. Right now, a man is about to lose everything because Boone wants to send a message. Load the hay." Tom hesitated, then nodded and rode off. Sarah Mackenzie watched with an expression Elena couldn't read. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both, but it's the right thing to do. "Your husband know you're making decisions like this?" "He will soon enough." Sarah smiled slightly. "I'm starting to understand why you survived that blizzard drive. You've got steel in you." Word of Elena's gift spread quickly. Within 3 days, 5 more ranchers agreed to meet about the cooperative. Within a week, Lars Bergstrom showed up at Blackstone Ridge with a formal proposal he'd worked out with several others. Rhett read it in his study while Elena waited nervously. Finally, he looked up. "This is good. Better than good. If we can get everyone to agree to these terms, we'll have enough collective strength to resist Boone indefinitely." "You're not angry I gave away the hay? I'm furious you made that decision without consulting me. I'm also impressed that it worked." He stood and pulled her close. "You're changing everything I thought I knew about how to run this ranch." Is that bad? It's terrifying, but in a good way. He kissed her forehead. When's the meeting? Saturday. At the church in Blackwater. Bergstrom spreading word to everyone who's interested. Then we better prepare. Boone will hear about this, and he won't be happy. Rhett was right. 2 days before the meeting, 3 more barns burned in the territory, all belonging to ranchers who'd agreed to attend. The message was clear. Boone knew about the cooperative and was willing to use violence to stop it. The morning of the meeting, Rhett assembled every man he trusted in the ranch yard. Today we're going to town to talk about an alliance. Boone knows about it, and he'll try to stop it. I want everyone armed. Anyone starts trouble, you defend yourselves, and the people we're protecting. Clear? The men nodded, their faces grim. Elena appeared dressed in her best outfit, the dark blue dress she'd worn to her wedding. Rhett looked at her with concern. You don't have to come. This could get ugly. These ranchers agreed to meet because I asked them to. I'm not hiding while they take the risk. Elena, we're partners, remember? We do this together. He looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. They rode to Blackwater with 20 armed men, half the ranch's entire workforce. The town was already buzzing with tension when they arrived. The church was packed. 30 ranchers and their families crowded into pews, all armed, all looking nervous. Elena recognized most of them from her visits. Bergstrom sat in the front with Sarah Mackenzie and Patrick O'Brien. But along the walls stood at least a dozen men Elena didn't recognize. Hard-faced strangers with guns and cold eyes. Boone's hired muscle, making their presence known without actually disrupting the meeting. Rhett stepped to the front of the church, and the room went silent. I know most of you hate me. I've been a bad neighbor, a ruthless competitor, someone who took advantage when you were weak instead of helping. I'm not here to apologize because words are cheap, but I'm here to acknowledge that I was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Silas Boone is trying to take everything we've built. Not just my ranch, all of our ranches. He's buying politicians, burning barns, intimidating families. He wants to own the entire territory, and he doesn't care who gets hurt in the process. Rhett gestured to Elena. My wife proposed something I was too proud to consider, that we're stronger together than divided. She's right. Alone, we're vulnerable. United, we can resist. Lars Bergstrom stood. Fine words. But what happens when this cooperation stops being convenient for you? What's to stop you from stabbing us in the back once Boone's dealt with? Before Rhett could answer, Elena stood. I'll tell you what stops him. A legally binding contract that makes this cooperation permanent. Not just an agreement, but an actual partnership with written terms, shared ownership of resources, and consequences for anyone who breaks the alliance. Including my husband. The room erupted in conversation. Elena raised her voice. I spent 2 weeks visiting each of your ranches. I saw how hard you work, how much you've sacrificed. I know you don't trust us, but I'm asking you to trust this. Boone won't stop until he owns everything. We can fight him separately and lose, or fight him together and win. That's the choice. Sarah Mackenzie stood. I'm in. The Callahan woman kept her word about the hay for Patrick. I'll trust her word about this. One by one, other ranchers stood. Not all of them, maybe half. But half was enough. That's when the church doors burst open. Silas Boone walked in, flanked by 10 armed men. His face was purple with rage, and his eyes fixed on Elena with pure hatred. Well, well, the little school teacher thinks she can organize against me. That's adorable. Rhett stepped in front of Elena, his hand on his gun. Get out, Boone. This is a private meeting. Private meeting in a public church? I don't think so. Boone smiled, but his eyes stayed cold. I came to make a final offer. Any rancher who walks away from this cooperation right now gets fair market value for their land. Anyone who stays gets buried with Callahan when his empire falls. The tension in the room was suffocating. Elena could see ranchers looking at each other, weighing their options. Some started to stand. Then Patrick O'Brien spoke up, his Irish accent thick. I was ready to lose everything 2 weeks ago. Then Mrs. Callahan gave me hay to keep my cattle alive through winter. Didn't ask for payment, didn't demand loyalty, just helped because it was right. That's more than you've ever done for any of us, Boone. That hay was a manipulation, Boone snarled. Maybe, but my cattle are alive because of it. I'm staying with the cooperative. Lars Bergstrom stood. Me too. Then Sarah Mackenzie. Then others. One by one, ranchers chose alliance over intimidation. Boone's face went from purple to almost black with rage. You're all making a mistake. A fatal mistake. The only mistake here is you thinking threats still work, Rhett said quietly. These people have suffered enough. They're done being afraid of you. Is that so? Boone pulled a folded document from his coat. I have signed affidavits from 3 witnesses stating that Elena Callahan trespassed on my property, stole confidential business documents, and conspired to damage my reputation. I could have her arrested right now. Elena's heart stopped. The document she'd taken from Wheeler's office. Somehow Boone knew. Those documents proved your conspiracy to commit fraud, Elena said, forcing her voice steady. Your word against mine, and I have expensive lawyers who will make sure that even if you're not convicted, you'll spend months in jail waiting for trial. Boone's smile was cruel. How's that going to work for your little cooperative? Their leader locked up like a common criminal? Rhett moved toward Boone, his hand on his gun, but Elena grabbed his arm. Don't! That's what he wants, an excuse to have you arrested for assault. So we just let him threaten you? No. We call his bluff. Elena stepped forward, ignoring Rhett's protest. Go ahead, Boone. Have me arrested. Throw me in jail. But while I'm there, I'll make sure every newspaper in the territory knows exactly what you did. The forged surveys, the burned barns, the murdered witnesses. I'll turn my trial into your public execution. You have no proof. I have Wheeler's testimony. I have financial records showing your payments to corrupt officials. I have witnesses who saw your men burning barns. You might own some judges, but you don't own the press. And when ordinary people read about a rich man trying to destroy small ranchers and then jailing the woman who exposed him, they tend to get angry. Boone's expression flickered with uncertainty. Elena pressed her advantage. Here's my counteroffer. You withdraw all legal threats, leave these ranchers alone, and accept that you lost this round. In return, I don't turn everything I know about you into front-page news. The church was dead silent. Everyone watched Boone, waiting to see how he'd respond. Finally, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're a clever girl, cleverer than I gave you credit for, but cleverness only gets you so far in the real world. Is that a yes or a no? It's a tactical retreat, for now. He looked around the church at the assembled ranchers. Enjoy your little cooperative. It won't last. Nothing built on weakness ever does. He turned and walked out, his men following. The moment the doors closed behind him, the church erupted in conversation. Rhett pulled Elena aside, his expression torn between pride and fury. That was incredibly brave and incredibly reckless. He could have had you arrested on the spot, but he didn't, because he knows I'm right about the newspapers. His power depends on reputation. I threatened the one thing he can't control. You also made yourself his primary target. He won't forget this. I know, but we bought time. That's all we need. Over the next hour, 23 ranchers signed the cooperative agreement. It wasn't everyone, but it was enough. They established bylaws, elected Sarah McKenzie as the first president, and agreed on resource-sharing protocols. By the time they left the church, Elena was exhausted but exhilarated. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd united independent ranchers who'd spent years competing into a functioning alliance. The ride back to the ranch was tense. Everyone expected an ambush, but the road stayed clear, and they reached Blackstone Ridge without incident. That night, Elena collapsed into bed emotionally drained. Rhett joined her, pulling her close. You were incredible today. I was terrified. That's what made it incredible. You did it anyway. He kissed her temple. I've never been more proud of anyone in my life. Elena turned to face him. Do you think it'll work, the cooperative? I think we have a chance, which is more than we had a month ago. He paused. Elena, I need to tell you something. What? When Boone threatened to arrest you, I was ready to kill him, right there in the church in front of everyone. The only thing that stopped me was you grabbing my arm. I know, I felt it. That's not how I'm supposed to be anymore. I'm supposed to be civilized, reasonable, but when someone threatens you, I stop being either of those things. Elena touched his face gently. You're human, Rhett. Humans protect the people they love. That's not weakness. It's the opposite. I do love you. I should have said it before, but I do. Completely, terrifyingly. I love you too. And yes, it's terrifying. They held each other in the darkness. both knowing that the battle with Boone was far from over. But for the first time, they weren't facing it alone. The next 2 weeks were deceptively quiet. The cooperative began operating, ranchers sharing water access, coordinating supply purchases, helping each other with repairs. The bank backed off its demands after several cooperative members moved their accounts and threatened to publicize why. Elena began to hope they'd actually won. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, Tom burst into the house looking panicked. "Mrs. Callahan, we need you in the barn. It's Maria." Elena ran. She found Maria on the ground, her face bruised and bloody. Mrs. Crawford knelt beside her, and several ranch hands stood around looking murderous. "What happened?" "Boone's men grabbed her in town," one of the hands said. "Beat her. Said it was a message for you." Elena knelt beside Maria, her hands shaking with rage and horror. "Did they?" "No, ma'am. Just beat me. Said next time it won't be just a beating." Maria's voice was steady despite the tears on her face. "Said to tell you that women who stick their noses in men's business get them broken. Get the doctor," Elena ordered. "Now!" After Maria was taken inside, Elena found Rhett in the yard loading rifles. "We're going after them." "No, we're not. That's exactly what Boone wants. An excuse to claim we attacked his men and have us arrested for assault. So we do nothing while he terrorizes our people? We don't do nothing. We make him pay in ways he can't counter with violence." Elena's mind raced. Violence wouldn't work. Legal action would be tied up in corrupt courts for years. They needed something else, something Boone couldn't defend against. Then it hit her. "I need to go to Denver." "What? Why?" "Because Denver has newspapers that Boone doesn't control. Journalists who will pay for a story about corruption in the territories. If we can't beat him legally here, we expose him where he has no power." "That's a 3-day ride in winter, with Boone's men looking for any chance to hurt you." "Then we make it look like I'm still here. I'll leave quietly with just Tom. Everyone else stays and maintains normal routines, so Boone thinks I'm hiding at the ranch." Rhett looked torn. Finally, he nodded. "I'm coming with you." "You can't. If both of us disappear, Boone will know something's up. I need you here keeping the ranch running and the cooperative organized." "I don't like this." "I don't either, but it's our best option." That night, Elena left Blackstone Ridge dressed in ranch hands clothes, her hair hidden under a hat. Tom accompanied her, along with 2 trusted men Rhett insisted on sending. They rode through darkness, avoiding main roads, camping in hidden spots. They reached Denver on the 3rd day, exhausted and frozen. Elena went straight to the offices of the Denver Tribune, the territory's most respected newspaper. The editor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Morrison, listened to Elena's story with growing interest. "You have documentation? Copies of financial records showing bribes, testimony from witnesses, names of murdered men who crossed Boone, everything. This is dynamite. If it's true, it could bring down half the territorial government." "It's true, and I need you to publish it before Boone can silence me permanently." Catherine studied her carefully. "He'll come after you hard once this prints. You ready for that?" "He's already coming after me. At least this way I'm hitting back." "All right. Give me everything you have. We'll run it in 3 days." Elena spent the next day going through documents with Catherine and 2 investigative journalists. They verified names, cross-referenced dates, and built an airtight case against Boone's network of corruption. On the 2nd day, Elena was leaving the newspaper office when a hand grabbed her arm. She spun to find Wheeler, the quartermaster who'd been arrested for stealing, standing behind her with a gun pressed against her side. "Boone wants to see you." "Let go of me or I'll scream." "Scream and I'll shoot you right here. Boone's got enough judges in his pocket that I'll walk free by morning. Now move." He forced her into an alley, then into a waiting carriage. Inside sat Silas Boone, looking pleased with himself. "Mrs. Callahan, we really must stop meeting under such dramatic circumstances." Elena fought down panic. "How did you know I was here?" "I have friends everywhere. Did you really think you could waltz into Denver and attack me without consequences?" He leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go back to that newspaper and tell them you made everything up. That you're a bitter woman, angry at your husband, and you fabricated evidence to hurt me." "I'll do no such thing." "Then your husband dies." "I have 6 men riding toward Blackstone Ridge right now. 1 telegram from me and they burn the ranch to the ground with everyone in it. including all those cooperative ranchers who trusted you. Elena's heart stopped. You're bluffing. Am I? Test me. See what happens. She stared at him, trying to read whether he was serious. His expression said he was. What do you want? I want you gone, out of the territory, back east where women like you belong. Leave within 24 hours and I'll leave your husband alone. Stay and everyone you care about dies. Simple choice. Rhett won't let me leave. Then don't tell him. Just disappear. He'll think you abandoned him. He'll be hurt, but he'll be alive. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes. Everything she'd built. The marriage that had become real. The love she'd found with a man who'd finally learned to trust. Boone was asking her to destroy it all to save Rhett's life. How do I know you'll keep your word? You don't. But you know I'll keep my word about killing everyone if you refuse. He smiled. Clock's ticking, Mrs. Callahan. What's it going to be? Elena looked at the man who'd terrorized an entire territory, who'd beaten Maria as a message, who was now threatening to murder dozens of people. She thought about Rhett waiting at the ranch, about the cooperative they'd built, about the life she'd finally found after so many failures. She made her choice. I need time to think. You have 1 hour. Then I send the telegram. Boone's men escorted her back to her hotel room and locked her in. Elena paced frantically, her mind racing. She couldn't abandon Rhett, but she also couldn't let Boone murder everyone, unless there was a third option. She looked at the window. 3rd floor. Too high to jump safely. But the building next door was close enough to reach if she was desperate. Elena was very desperate. She tied sheets together, secured one end to the bed frame and threw the other out the window. Then she climbed out onto the ledge, her heart hammering, and jumped. She hit the next building's roof hard, rolling to absorb impact. Pain shot through her shoulder, but nothing felt broken. She ran across the roof, found a fire escape, and climbed down. By the time Boone's men realized she was gone, Elena was already at the telegraph office, sending an urgent message to the ranch. Boone threatening attack, stop. 6 men coming, stop. Prepare defenses, stop. Publishing evidence anyway, stop. Love, you stop. Then she ran back to the newspaper office and told Catherine everything. Print it, tonight, before he can stop you. If we print tonight, he'll know you defied him. He'll carry out his threat. I sent warning to the ranch. They'll be ready. But we can't let fear stop us from exposing the truth. Catherine looked at her with respect. You're either very brave or very crazy. Probably both. Can you print tonight or not? We can. But Mrs. Callahan, you should leave Denver. Once this prints, you won't be safe anywhere Boone has reach. I'm going back. My place is with my husband, defending our home. Tom and the ranch hands tried to talk her out of it during the brutal 3-day ride back. But Elena was determined. She'd started this fight. She'd see it through. They reached Blackstone Ridge just after dawn on the 4th day to find the ranch transformed into a fortress. Barricades blocked the main road. Armed men patrolled the perimeter, and Rhett stood in the yard looking like he hadn't slept in days. The moment he saw her, relief flooded his face. He crossed the distance between them in seconds and pulled her into his arms. You're alive. When I got your telegram, I thought... His voice broke. I'm fine. Did the men come? They tried. We were ready. Drove them off without casualties. He pulled back to look at her. The newspaper printed. This morning, front page, everything. Then Boone's finished. Maybe. Or maybe he's desperate enough to try one final attack. As if summoned by her words, a rider appeared on the ridge, one of the sentries. Mr. Callahan, riders coming, at least 20 men. Rhett's expression hardened. Get inside, now. I'm not hiding while you fight. Elena, we're partners. Together, remember? He looked at her for a long moment, then handed her a rifle. Stay behind cover. Shoot anyone who isn't us. The next hour was chaos. Boone's men attacked from multiple directions, trying to burn barns, stampede cattle, break through defenses. But Rhett had prepared well. The ranch hands fought with desperate determination, and the barricades held. Then Boone himself appeared, riding up the main road with a white flag. Rhett met him at the gate with Elena beside him. It's over, Boone. Your corruption is front-page news. The territorial governor has already called for investigations. Your political allies are abandoning you. Surrender now, and you might see a trial instead of a rope. Boone's face was twisted with rage. This is all her fault. That uppity woman who should have known her place. My wife saved this territory from you. She's a hero. She's a dead woman. Boone pulled a hidden gun and aimed it at Elena. Time seemed to slow. Rhett moved to shield her. The gun fired, but the bullet hit Boone. Tom stood 20 feet away with a smoking rifle, his expression grim. Told you I'd protect her, sir. Boone fell from his horse, clutching his shoulder. His men froze, unsure whether to fight or flee. It's over, Rhett announced, his voice carrying across the valley. Anyone who wants to keep fighting, step forward. Anyone who's smart enough to walk away, drop your weapons and go. One by one, Boone's men dropped their guns and rode off. The sheriff arrived an hour later and arrested Boone on attempted murder charges, in addition to the dozens of charges from the newspaper expose. As they dragged him away, he looked at Elena with pure hatred. You'll regret this. I regret nothing, Elena said firmly. You terrorized innocent people. Now you'll face justice. After the sheriff left with Boone, the cooperative ranchers who'd come to help defend Blackstone Ridge gathered in the yard. Lars Bergstrom approached Rhett with his hand extended. You fought well today, Callahan. All of us. Rhett shook his hand. We held because we stood together. That's what Elena's been trying to tell me all along. Sarah Mackenzie smiled at Elena. You did it. You actually did it. We did it, all of us. That night, after everyone had gone and the ranch was finally quiet, Elena sat with Rhett on the porch, watching stars appear over the valley. It's really over, she said quietly. The fighting is. But we've got work ahead rebuilding, strengthening the cooperative, helping the territory recover from Boone's corruption. That's different work, though. Building instead of surviving. He pulled her close. I couldn't have done any of this without you. The cooperative, exposing Boone, defending the ranch. None of it. We're partners. More than that, you're the strongest person I know. He turned to face her. Elena, I spent 7 years being half alive after Margaret died. You made me whole again. You challenged me, fought with me, refused to let me hide. You saved me. You saved me too. Gave me a home, a purpose, a family. Speaking of family, he placed a hand gently on her stomach. Are you going to tell me, or should I keep pretending I haven't noticed? Elena's breath caught. How long have you known? About 3 weeks. You get sick in the mornings, you're exhausted by afternoon. And you've been avoiding coffee like it personally offended you. His eyes were tender. We're going to have a baby. Tears spilled down Elena's face, happy tears this time. We're going to have a baby. Rhett kissed her with the gentleness that still surprised her sometimes. The hard man who'd written that cold advertisement was gone, replaced by someone who knew how to be human again. I love you, he said against her lips. I love you too. They sat together under the stars, planning a future that looked nothing like the business arrangement they'd started with. A real marriage, a real family, a real home built on trust and partnership and love they'd both been too broken to believe in. Elena had come west expecting nothing more than security and a child. She'd found a kingdom, a partnership, and a love story she'd never dared imagine. And it was only the beginning. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Elena spent the first 3 months either in bed or hovering over a basin, her body rebelling against the changes happening inside it. Rhett hovered worse than Maria, bringing her ginger tea and dry toast at odd hours, checking on her constantly until she finally snapped at him. I'm pregnant, not dying. Stop treating me like I'm made of glass. You were dry heaving for an hour this morning. Forgive me for being concerned. Concern is fine, smothering is not. She softened her tone when she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Rhett, women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'll survive this. Margaret didn't. There it was, the truth he'd been dancing around for weeks. Elena took his hand and squeezed hard. I'm not Margaret. I'm stronger than I look, and I'm too stubborn to die before I meet this baby. You're going to have to trust that. I'm trying. It's harder than it should be. I know. But you don't get to wrap me in cotton and hide me away. I still have work to do. And she did. The cooperative was thriving but required constant attention. Disputes over water rights, coordination of cattle drives, negotiations with suppliers. Elena handled most of it from the ranch, but some things required her presence in town. 4 months into her pregnancy, she attended a cooperative meeting in Blackwater despite Rhett's protests. The meeting went smoothly until afterward, when a group of townswomen approached her outside the church. They were led by Martha Henderson, the mayor's wife, one of the women who'd called Elena barren months ago. "Mrs. Callahan, we wanted to apologize." Elena blinked in surprise. "For what?" "For the things we said about you, the cruel gossip. We were wrong about you, about your marriage, about everything." Martha's cheeks were red with embarrassment. "What you did, organizing the cooperative, exposing Boone, defending the ranchers, that took real courage. More than any of us had." "I appreciate that," Elena said carefully. Another woman stepped forward. "We'd like to make amends. We're organizing a quilting circle to make baby clothes for your child, if you'd accept them." Elena felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. Pregnancy hormones made her cry at everything lately, but this felt different. These women had dismissed her as worthless. Now they were offering friendship. "I'd be honored. Thank you." The tension broke, and suddenly women were chattering about patterns and fabrics and whether Elena wanted pink or blue. She left the meeting feeling lighter than she had in months. When she told Rhett that evening, he smiled. "The whole territory is changing because of you. People are starting to realize that strength comes in different forms. It's not just me. The cooperative did this, showing people that working together is better than tearing each other down. Still, you started it. You believed it was possible when everyone else, including me, thought it was crazy." Elena shifted uncomfortably in her chair, trying to find a position where her back didn't ache. "Can we talk about something other than my accomplishments? I'm starting to feel like a show pony." "Fair enough. Let's talk about names instead." "Names?" "For the baby. We should decide." They spent the next hour debating options. Rhett wanted traditional family names. Elena wanted something unique. They compromised on keeping a list of possibilities and waiting to see what felt right once the baby arrived. "What if it's twins?" Elena asked suddenly. "Why would it be twins?" "I don't know, just a feeling. I'm much bigger than Sarah Mackenzie was at this stage, and she only had one." Rhett looked alarmed. "Should I get the doctor?" "No, you should stop panicking every time I mention the pregnancy. Honestly, Rhett, you're worse than a nervous cat." "I'm not panicking. You've checked the doctor's availability 3 times this week. You've stockpiled enough medical supplies to run a hospital. And yesterday I caught you reading a midwifery manual like it was the most important document you'd ever seen." He had the grace to look sheepish. "I want to be prepared." "You're preparing for every possible disaster. That's not the same thing." "Can you blame me? The woman I love is going through something dangerous and I can't control any of it. Preparation is all I have." Elena's irritation melted. She took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly. "Feel that?" A strong kick hit his palm, then another. "That's our baby telling you to calm down. Everything's going to be fine." Rhett's expression softened in a way that still surprised her sometimes. The transformation from the cold man who'd written that advertisement to this man who melted at the feel of his unborn child kicking, it was remarkable. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know. Now go do something productive and stop hovering." Spring arrived with a violence that matched everything else about the frontier. The snow melted in rushing floods. Rivers overflowed. And the cooperative's first major test came when a landslide destroyed the main road used for cattle drives. Elena was 7 months pregnant and the size of a house when the emergency meeting was called. Rhett tried to make her stay home, but she refused. "This affects everyone. I need to be there." "You can barely walk without waddling." "Then I'll waddle. Let's go." The meeting was tense. Without the main road, getting cattle to market would be impossible. Alternative routes would add weeks to the drive and cost thousands in extra expenses. Some ranchers wanted to sue the railroad that had destabilized the hillside with construction. Others wanted to pool funds to repair the road themselves. Elena listened to the arguments for an hour before speaking up. "We're approaching this wrong. We don't need to repair the old road or find alternatives. We need to negotiate with the railroad." "They won't listen to us," Lars Bergstrom said. "They're a massive company. We're just local ranchers." "Individually, yes, but the cooperative represents 70% of the cattle business in this territory. The railroad needs us to ship livestock. If we threaten to refuse their services until they repair the damage they caused, they'll listen." "That's a big gamble," Sarah Mackenzie said. "Smaller gamble than spending our own money fixing their mess or losing a season's profit on longer cattle drives." After heated debate, the cooperative voted to try Elena's approach. She drafted a formal letter to the railroad company outlining their demands and the consequences of refusal. 3 weeks later, the railroad capitulated and began repairs. "How did you know that would work?" Rhett asked that night. "I didn't, but I knew they couldn't afford to lose our business. Sometimes the threat is more powerful than the action." "You're getting too good at this. Pretty soon you won't need me at all." Elena laughed and struggled to stand from her chair. "I'll always need you, if nothing else, to help me get up when I'm the size of a barn." He pulled her to her feet and into his arms as best he could around her enormous belly. "You're beautiful." "I'm huge. Beautifully huge. Carrying our child. I've never found you more attractive." "You're delusional." "Probably. But it's true anyway." That night, Elena woke to sharp pain in her lower back. She lay still for a moment, trying to determine if it was just the normal aches of late pregnancy or something more serious. Then her water broke. "Rhett." She shook his shoulder. "Rhett, wake up." He came awake instantly, years of ranch emergencies training him to alertness. "What's wrong?" "The baby's coming." He went from asleep to moving faster than she'd ever seen. Within minutes, he had Tom writing for the doctor, Mrs. Crawford preparing the bedroom, and Maria heating water. Elena would have been impressed if she wasn't too busy dealing with contractions. The doctor arrived an hour later, an experienced older woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who was, coincidentally, the sister of Elena's friend from Red Hollow. She examined Elena and nodded. "You're progressing normally. First babies usually take a while, so settle in for a long night." The long night turned into a long day. Elena labored through the morning and into the afternoon, exhausted and in pain but determined. Rhett stayed with her despite Dr. Chen's suggestion that he wait elsewhere. "I'm not leaving her. Most men prefer not to witness childbirth. I'm not most men, I stay." Elena would have kissed him if she wasn't too busy screaming through another contraction. The pain was worse than anything she'd imagined, worse than the blizzard drive, worse than being thrown from her horse. This was agony that felt like it would split her in two. "I can't do this," she gasped between contractions. "Yes, you can," Rhett said firmly, holding her hand. "You're the strongest person I know. If you can face down Silas Boone, you can do this." Boone didn't feel like he was ripping me apart from the inside. "Fair point, but you're doing it anyway. I can see the baby's head." 20 minutes later, their first child entered the world screaming. Dr. Chen worked quickly, clearing airways and checking for problems. "It's a boy, healthy and angry." Elena collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond words. Rhett cut the cord with shaking hands, and Dr. Chen placed the baby on Elena's chest. He was red and wrinkled and covered in fluid and absolutely perfect. "Hello," Elena whispered to her son. "We've been waiting for you." The baby quieted at her voice, his tiny eyes trying to focus on her face. Rhett looked at both of them with an expression of such pure wonder that Elena started crying again. "We have a son," he said, voice thick with emotion. "We do." Dr. Chen cleared her throat. "I hate to interrupt, but we're not quite done. Mrs. Callahan, you need to push again." Elena looked at her in confusion. "Why?" "Because there's another baby coming. You were right about the twins." The next 15 minutes were a blur of exhaustion and pushing and wondering how it was possible to be this tired and still have to keep going. But finally, their second child arrived, smaller than the first, but just as loud. "A girl," Dr. Chen announced, smiling broadly. "Congratulations, you have twins." Elena looked at the two babies, one in her arms, one being cleaned by Maria, and felt something inside her shift permanently. All the rejection she'd faced, all the humiliation, all the desperate loneliness that had driven her to answer Rhett's advertisement. It had led to this moment, to these two perfect, screaming miracles. "What should we name them?" Rhett asked, looking shell-shocked. "I was thinking," Elena paused, considering. "Margaret for the girl, after your first wife. She should be remembered." Rhett's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to do that." "I want to. She was part of your life, part of what made you who you are, and naming our daughter after her feels right." "And the boy?" "Thomas. After Tom. He saved both our lives more than once. He deserves the honor." Rhett nodded, unable to speak. He leaned down and kissed Elena's forehead gently. Thank you. For them. For everything. For not giving up on me when I was too broken to know I needed saving. We saved each other. Over the next few hours, word spread across the ranch and into the territory. By evening, the yard was full of people waiting for news. When Rhett emerged holding his son, the entire assembled crowd erupted in cheers. Tom approached, his weathered face softened with emotion. Heard you named the boy after me. We did. Hope that's all right. It's more than all right. It's the greatest honor of my life. He looked at the baby. I'll protect him same as I protected his mother. You have my word. The celebration continued into the night. Ranch hands broke out whiskey. Neighbors brought food. Children ran around the yard playing. And through it all, Rhett kept returning to the bedroom to check on Elena and their daughter. You should be out there celebrating, Elena said when he appeared for the 5th time. I'd rather be here with you. Rhett Callahan turning down a party. The world really has changed. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle her. The world has changed because of you. You came here expecting a cold business arrangement and turned it into a family. You organized bitter rivals into a cooperative. You exposed corruption and saved the territory. You gave me back my humanity, and now you've given me children. He shook his head in wonder. I don't know what I did to deserve you. You took a chance on a woman nobody wanted. You learned to trust again. You let yourself be vulnerable even though it terrified you. That's what you did. I'm still terrified. Every day I'm afraid of losing you or the children, of something going wrong, of not being a good enough father. Being afraid means you care, and caring is what makes you good at this. Elena reached up to touch his face. We'll figure it out together, like we figure out everything else. Together, he agreed. The twins grew quickly. Thomas was bigger and louder, demanding attention with lung power that could wake the entire house. Margaret was smaller but fiercer, glaring at anyone who wasn't her mother with suspicious dark eyes. Elena recovered slowly from the birth, her body exhausted but healing. The cooperative members sent food, supplies, and offers to help with anything needed. The quilting circle delivered an entire trunk of baby clothes, and the ranch hands competed for who could make the twins laugh first. Tom won that contest, making ridiculous faces until both babies gurgled with delight. You're going to spoil them, Elena said, watching him. That's my right as honorary uncle. You two handle the discipline. I handle the spoiling. 6 weeks after the birth, Elena was strong enough to take short walks around the ranch. She ventured out one afternoon to find significant changes. New buildings were under construction. The pastures looked organized differently. Everything seemed to be expanding. She found Rhett in the north field overseeing fence construction. What's all this? Expansion. The cooperative's growing and we need more space for shared operations. That building there will be a joint supply warehouse. The fence is marking out new common grazing land that all members can use. When did we decide this? At the meeting 2 weeks ago. You were too exhausted to attend, so I handled it. Elena felt a flash of irritation. You should have consulted me. You were recovering from giving birth to twins. I thought you'd appreciate me handling ranch business. I appreciate you caring about my health. I don't appreciate being cut out of decisions. Rhett looked frustrated. I can't win. If I involve you, I'm pushing you too hard. If I don't involve you, I'm excluding you. What do you want from me? I want you to ask instead of deciding for me. I want to be treated like a partner, even when I'm tired or busy with the babies. I want... She stopped, realizing she was being unfair. I'm sorry. I'm exhausted and hormonal, and I'm taking it out on you. You don't need to apologize for wanting to be included. I do when I'm snapping at you for trying to be considerate. She moved closer, softening. I know you're trying to balance everything. Give me time to find my footing as a mother and I'll be back to full partnership mode. But in the meantime, keep me informed even if I can't attend every meeting. Deal? Deal. They walked back to the house together and Elena realized this was what real partnership looked like. Not perfect agreement, not smooth cooperation, but two imperfect people working through disagreements with honesty instead of resentment. As spring turned to summer, the cooperative flourished. The railroad completed road repairs ahead of schedule. Cattle prices rose. And for the first time in years, small ranchers in the territory felt secure instead of desperate. The territorial governor visited Blackstone Ridge in July to personally thank Elena for her role in exposing Boone's corruption. The investigation had led to dozens of arrests and a complete restructuring of territorial government. "You did the territory a great service, Mrs. Callahan." "I just exposed the truth. Other people did the hard work of fixing what was broken." "Modesty doesn't suit you. You're a hero whether you admit it or not." After he left, Rhett found Elena on the porch holding Margaret while Thomas napped in his cradle. "How does it feel being a territorial hero?" "Weird. Uncomfortable. Like I'm being given credit I don't deserve." "You deserve every bit of it. You changed everything, Elena. This territory is better because you refused to accept how things were. We changed things, together." He sat beside her and they watched the sun set over the valley in comfortable silence. The ranch stretched below them, thriving, growing, full of life. So different from the cold fortress Elena had arrived at months ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Rhett asked suddenly. "Answering my advertisement? Coming here?" "Sometimes I regret how hard it was, how much we both struggled to trust each other, but regret coming? Never. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though I was terrible to you at first? Especially because of that. If you'd been perfect from the start, I would have never seen you grow, never witnessed you choosing to be vulnerable, never fallen in love with the real you instead of a comfortable fantasy. I wasn't sure I could ever be enough for you. I'm still not sure." Elena shifted Margaret to her other arm and took Rhett's hand. "You don't need to be enough. You just need to be present, to try, to keep choosing us even when it's hard. That's all I ask." "I can do that." "I know. You already have been." In August, the first annual cooperative gathering took place at Blackstone Ridge. Over 200 people attended, ranchers, families, town officials. It was part business meeting, part celebration, and part statement to the territory that collaboration had replaced competition. Elena gave a speech that was supposed to be brief but turned into a passionate declaration about the power of working together, about how individual strength paled compared to collective action, about how the frontier didn't have to be a place where only the ruthless survived. "We've proven that taking care of each other makes everyone stronger," she concluded, "that helping your neighbor doesn't weaken you, it builds the whole community. The old way, fighting alone, trusting no one, seeing everything as competition, that way nearly destroyed us all. This new way, building together, that's what will carry us into the future." The applause was thunderous. Afterward, dozens of people approached to thank her personally. Some shared how the cooperative had saved their ranches. Others talked about how her example had inspired them to take risks they'd been too afraid to attempt. Elena listened to each story, feeling humbled and overwhelmed. She'd come west as a failure. A woman rejected 5 times who'd finally settled for a loveless arrangement because she was desperate for family. Now people were calling her a leader, a visionary, a hero. It felt surreal. That night, after everyone had gone and the ranch was quiet, Elena stood in the nursery watching her children sleep. Thomas sprawled on his back, arms flung wide. Margaret curled on her side, tiny fist pressed against her cheek. "They're perfect," Rhett said from the doorway. "They're noisy, demanding, and they've completely destroyed any semblance of a normal sleep schedule." "So, perfect." Elena smiled and moved into his arms. "Did you ever imagine this when you wrote that advertisement?" "No. I imagined a business-like arrangement, someone to manage the house and provide an heir. I never imagined a partner, a true companion, someone who'd challenge me to be better. I never imagined falling in love with the man who wrote that cold advertisement. I thought I'd have security and a child, and that would be enough. I had no idea I'd find actual happiness." They stood together in the darkened nursery, listening to their children breathe, and Elena thought about the journey that had brought them here. Every rejection in Red Hollow had been necessary. Every humiliation had built the strength she'd need. Every failure had prepared her for this success. She'd answered an advertisement looking for safety. She'd found a kingdom to help build, a community to transform, a love that had healed them both. "Thank you," she whispered to Rhett. "For what?" "For giving a woman nobody chose the chance to become someone who mattered. You always mattered. You just needed people who could see it. Well, you see me now." "I do, and I'll never stop looking." The years that followed weren't perfect. Partnerships never are. They fought sometimes. Heated arguments about ranch decisions or child rearing or whose turn it was to deal with crying babies at 3 in the morning. Rhett occasionally reverted to his controlling tendencies, and Elena had to remind him forcefully that she was his partner, not his employee. But they worked through every conflict with honesty instead of walls. They chose each other deliberately, every day, even when it was difficult. And slowly, the cold fortress of Blackstone Ridge transformed into an actual home. The cooperative grew to include nearly every rancher in the territory. They built a shared school where Elena occasionally taught. They established fair trade agreements. They created a system of mutual support that protected everyone from the kind of predatory behavior Boone had represented. Thomas and Margaret grew into curious, strong-willed children who kept their parents constantly exhausted. Thomas was all energy and noise, racing around the ranch from dawn until collapse. Margaret was quieter but fiercer, with her mother's intelligence and her father's stubbornness. "We're in so much trouble when they're older," Rhett said one evening, watching Margaret systematically dismantle a toy to understand how it worked, while Thomas used the pieces to build a fort. "They're going to run this ranch someday. Better they learn to be strong now. Margaret's going to be a terror, just like her mother." I'm going to choose to take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. On their 5th anniversary, Rhett surprised Elena by taking her back to Red Hollow. The town looked exactly the same, small, isolated, stuck in time. "Why did you bring me here?" Elena asked as they stood on the train platform where she'd left 5 years ago. "Because I wanted you to see how far you've come. The woman who left this place thought she was a failure. I wanted you to see that the world was wrong about her, not the other way around." Elena looked around at the familiar buildings, feeling no connection to this place anymore. Her home was Blackstone Ridge. Her family was Rhett and the twins. Her community was the cooperative. Red Hollow was just a place she used to live, not who she was. "Thank you," she said, "but I already know I'm not the woman who left here. I proved it every day." "I know. I just wanted to make sure you knew it too." They visited Sarah Chen's sister briefly, then left. Elena didn't look back as the train pulled away. That chapter of her life was closed. A new, better one had taken its place. By the time the twins were 7, Blackstone Ridge had become legendary throughout the territory. Not because it was the biggest ranch, though it was successful. Not because of wealth, though they were comfortable. But because it represented something unusual. A place where partnership mattered more than power. Where helping others was seen as strength rather than weakness. Where a woman and a man had built something together based on trust and mutual respect. People came from other territories to study their cooperative model. Journalists wrote articles about the transformation of the Northern Territories from brutal competition to collaboration. And students in schools across the West learned about Elena Callahan, the school teacher who'd organized a revolution with nothing but intelligence and courage. Elena hated the attention. She preferred working behind the scenes, managing operations, and solving problems. But Rhett convinced her that her visibility mattered. "People need to see that someone like you, someone who was dismissed and rejected, can achieve remarkable things. Your story gives other people hope." "My story makes me sound like I did everything alone. You were part of all of it." "I was. But you were the catalyst. You made me better. You made the ranch better. You made the whole territory better. That's worth recognizing." On Elena's 38th birthday, the cooperative held a surprise celebration in her honor. Every member ranch attended. The territorial governor sent a formal proclamation. And Lars Bergstrom gave a speech that brought tears to Elena's eyes. 9 years ago, a woman showed up in our territory who'd been told she wasn't good enough, not pretty enough, not quiet enough, not obedient enough. She'd failed 5 times to find a man who wanted her, but she didn't let that failure define her. Instead, she came here and built something none of us had the courage to imagine. A community where we took care of each other instead of tearing each other down. She saved our ranches. She exposed corruption. She showed us that strength comes from helping each other, not crushing each other. Elena Callahan, we owe you everything. The applause was deafening. Elena stood overwhelmed, looking at the faces of people she'd worked with for years, people who'd started as skeptics and become friends, a community she'd helped build. Rhett stood beside her, holding her hand, smiling with pride. The twins sat in front, Margaret looking bored and Thomas making faces at other children. Her family. Her real family. Not the one she'd been born to, but the one she'd chosen and built. That night, lying in bed beside Rhett, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't answered your advertisement? I'd probably still be a miserable tyrant ruling an empire of fear and calling it success. And I'd probably still be teaching in Red Hollow, bitter and alone and convinced I'd failed at life. We saved each other from pretty bleak futures. We did, though I'm not sure either of us knew what we were signing up for. Rhett rolled toward her, his expression tender in the lamplight. I thought I was hiring someone to manage my house and give me an heir. I ended up with a partner who transformed my entire life. Best business decision I ever made. Romantic, Elena said dryly. I'm terrible at romance. You knew that when you married me. You're better at it than you think. You just express it differently than other people. How do I express it? By listening when I challenge you. By valuing my input even when it contradicts yours. By letting yourself be vulnerable instead of hiding behind walls. By choosing to trust me every day even though you're terrified of being hurt. She touched his face gently. That's romance, Rhett. The real kind. Not flowers and poetry, but actual partnership. He kissed her, still surprising her after all these years with tenderness she'd never expected from the cold man who'd written that advertisement. I love you, he said simply. I love you too. They fell asleep tangled together, two people who'd started as strangers with a contract and become partners in every sense of the word. Years later, when Elena was asked to write her life story for a territorial history project, she struggled with how to frame it. The facts were simple. Mail-order bride transforms failing marriage into successful partnership and helps build cooperative that changes entire territory. But the real story was more complicated. It was about a woman who'd internalized every rejection until she believed she was worthless, who'd settled for a loveless arrangement because she thought that was all she deserved, who discovered that what the world called failure was actually preparation for success. It was about a man who'd built walls so high he couldn't see over them, who'd confused control with strength and isolation with safety, who'd learned that letting someone in was harder and braver than keeping everyone out. It was about two broken people who'd chosen each other not because they were perfect, but because they were both willing to try, who'd built something beautiful not despite their flaws, but because they'd acknowledged those flaws and worked through them together. In the end, Elena wrote a simple truth. I came west looking for safety and found purpose instead. I expected obligation and discovered love. I thought I was settling for less and ended up with more than I'd ever imagined. The best things in life aren't the ones that come easily. They're the ones you fight for together. The story of Elena and Rhett Callahan became legend in the territory. Not because it was extraordinary, though it was, but because it was true in a way that resonated with people who'd also felt worthless, rejected, or broken. It showed that failure wasn't final, that being dismissed by others didn't define your worth, that partnership built on honesty and mutual respect could transform everything. On their 20th anniversary, Rhett and Elena stood on the same porch where he'd first told her he was falling in love. The ranch spread below them, thriving, peaceful, full of life. Thomas was away at university studying agriculture. Margaret helped run the cooperative's administrative office, fierce and competent at 18. We did well, Rhett said quietly. We did. Not perfectly, but well. What's the difference? Perfect would have been easier, smoother, no fights or struggles or learning curves. Well means we worked for it, earned it, built it together despite the difficulties. Elena leaned against him. I prefer well. Me too. They watched the sun set in comfortable silence. Two people who'd spent 20 years learning how to be partners. Who'd raised children together. Built a business together. Transformed a community together. Who'd started with nothing but a contract and created something that would outlast them both. Elena thought about the woman she'd been when she'd arrived. Desperate, scared, convinced she was settling for less. She thought about the journey that had brought her from that woman to this one. Every rejection had mattered. Every humiliation had taught her something. Every failure had been necessary preparation for this success. She'd come to the frontier as nobody's choice and become someone who mattered. Not because she was perfect, but because she'd refused to let other people's opinions define her worth. Because she'd chosen courage over comfort. Because she'd built a partnership with a damaged man and they'd healed each other in the process. The moral wasn't that love conquered all. It didn't. The moral was that choosing to trust someone, to be vulnerable, to to build something together that was harder and braver than staying safe behind walls. That real strength came from acknowledging weakness and asking for help. That the people who dismiss you often say more about their limitations than yours. Elena had learned that being too much, too educated, too outspoken, too independent wasn't a failure. It just meant she needed a partner strong enough to appreciate those qualities instead of being threatened by them. She'd learned that the best relationships weren't the ones that started easily. They were the ones both people chose deliberately, every day, even when it was hard. Most importantly, she'd learned that you didn't need to be anyone's first choice to build a remarkable life. You just needed to choose yourself, to value your own worth regardless of other people's opinions, to refuse to settle for less than partnership, respect, and genuine connection. As stars appeared over Blackstone Ridge, Elena squeezed Rhett's hand. Thank you for taking a chance on a woman nobody wanted. Thank you for taking a chance on a man too broken to know he needed saving. We saved each other. We did. Best decision either of us ever made. They stood together watching night fall over the kingdom they'd built. Two imperfect people who'd created something extraordinary through nothing more complicated than choosing each other every day for 20 years. And that, Elena thought, was the real story worth telling. Not about perfection or destiny or fate, but about choice, partnership, the courage to be vulnerable, and the remarkable things that can happen when two broken people decide to heal together instead of suffering alone. The woman nobody chose had become the queen of her own making, and she'd done it not by changing who she was, but by finding someone who saw her value when the rest of the world was too blind to notice. That was legacy enough for any life.